Hello, and welcome to Earthology. I'm so glad you're here. Before we begin, may I ask, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Maybe you're curled up in bed, the day finally slowing down. Maybe you're stretched out on the couch, letting the hum of the evening settle in. Or perhaps you're outside, under the stars, listening with the quiet company of the night air. However you've arrived here, it's a true pleasure to have your company. If this is your first time visiting Earthology, welcome. This is a place where we take things slowly, where science and storytelling meet not in urgency, but in reflection. If you'd enjoy more journeys like this one, long, calm explorations of Earth's hidden stories, I invite you to gently subscribe. Your quiet support helps this corner of curiosity continue to grow, steadily and patiently, like ivy across an old stone wall. And for those who have joined me here before, thank you. Your presence makes this space alive. Now, I'll do my best not to make tonight's subject too fascinating. After all, the goal is not to keep you awake all night, eyes wide with thoughts of chloroplasts and root networks. The goal is to help you drift, gently, calmly, toward rest. But if you do happen to remain awake, I can promise you one thing. You will be carried along by the extraordinary story of plants. So let your shoulders loosen. Let your breath deepen. Allow your thoughts to slow, like a field of sunflowers turning together toward the fading light. Tonight, we're going to step into a world so familiar that most of us stop noticing it. A world that doesn't roar or race or demand attention. A world that stands silently, patiently, and yet holds the power to shape entire planets. This is the hidden life of plants. Why plants seem invisible? Think about the last time you noticed a tree. Truly noticed it. Not as background in your commute. Not as shade on a hot day. Not as a landmark. But as a living being. It's rarer than we think. Plants are so constant that our minds begin to blur them into scenery. A tree becomes wallpaper. Grass becomes simply the ground. Even the potted fern by your window becomes decoration. And yet, without them, life as we know it would not exist. The air in your lungs right now is a gift of plants. The food on your table is their offering, directly or indirectly. The walls that shelter you, the medicines that heal you, the paper that carries our stories, all of it flows from their quiet labor. Plants do not just live on Earth. They make Earth what it is. But how did something so silent, so still, come to build the very conditions for life? A central question. Tonight, we'll follow a question that has lingered for as long as humans have wondered about the green world. What secret lives do plants lead when we are not watching? How did they take a barren, rocky planet and turn it into one filled with forests and flowers? How do they sense, communicate, and even make decisions in their quiet, patient way? And what might happen to us and to all of life if we were to lose too many of them? This won't be a quick journey. It will be long and unhurried, like the unfurling of a fern. 3 hours spent wandering through the hidden life of plants. We'll move slowly, chapter by chapter, from ancient oceans where photosynthetic microbes exhaled oxygen into the sky, to the first mosses that crept onto land, to the rise of roots, forests, and flowers, to the subtle intelligence of leaves and seeds, to the underground networks that connect entire ecosystems, to the bond between plants and humans in food, medicine, shelter, and story, and finally to the uncertain future where plants may hold the key to whether Earth remains habitable. This is not just science. It is story of patience, of quiet revolutions, of light turned into life. So I invite you to settle in. Rest your eyes. Breathe deeply. Let us begin at the beginning. Before trees, before flowers, before roots, when Earth was young, hostile, and waiting for its first touch of green. Hello again, dear listener. Now that we have settled ourselves, let us drift together, not forward in time, but backward. Far, far backward, into a world so unfamiliar it would seem alien to our senses. A world before the green, before the forests and the flowers, before the grass beneath your feet, before even the moss on stone. Let your imagination soften and step with me into that ancient earth, as it was more than 2 billion years ago. If you could stand at the edge of the ocean, then you would not recognize it. The sky was heavy, colored not with the deep blue we know, but with a haze of gases that would choke our lungs. Methane, carbon dioxide, vapors from restless volcanoes. The sun would shine, but through that thick sky it would fall dim and strange, its warmth often smothered by the atmosphere's shifting veil. The sea would stretch outward, restless and dark. The waves would foam, but they would touch no living shore. There were no trees to lean against, no grasses to soften the coastline. The land was barren rock, young and raw, newly shaped by fire and water. And yet, though the surface seemed empty, life was already there. Not in the forms we know, but in small and quiet beings, so small we could not have seen them without a lens. They drifted in the water, clung to stones, and formed thin films across shallow pools. They were unassuming, but within their tiny bodies they carried a secret. These little creatures were cyanobacteria. You might know them by another name, blue-green algae. They were not algae as we know them, not plants with leaves or stems. They were closer to the simplest microbes, tiny cells no larger than a speck. And yet they were the first beings to discover a power that would alter the very destiny of Earth. They had learned to eat light. Imagine that for a moment. In a world of stone and storm, these tiny cells could sip from the sun. They captured sunlight, and with it they transformed the raw materials around them, carbon dioxide from the air, water from the sea, into energy, into the sugars that sustained their lives. It was chemistry, yes, but also a kind of alchemy. They were turning light into life. And as they worked, they exhaled. They released something they themselves did not need in abundance, but which would, in time, become the very breath of the planet. They released oxygen. At first, it was only a trickle, small and unremarkable. Bubbles slipping upward through the water, drifting into the air, dissolving here and there. But time on Earth is vast, and what is a trickle in one lifetime becomes a flood across millions of years. Slowly, invisibly, the world began to change. The oceans, once starved of oxygen, began to fill with it. The sky, once hostile, began to shift. With every passing millennium, more oxygen entered the air until the very chemistry of Earth was rewritten. We call it now the Great Oxygenation Event, but to the beings alive at that time, it was not a gift. It was catastrophe. You see, oxygen is strange. To us, it is life. To breathe is to welcome it into our blood, to let it nourish each cell. But to the ancient microbes that ruled the earth, oxygen was poison. It corroded their delicate chemistry. It burned their bodies. To them, the rise of oxygen was the arrival of a deadly toxin. Entire forms of life, once thriving, began to vanish. For countless species, this slow flood of oxygen was the end. And yet, what ended one story began another. For in the presence of oxygen, new possibilities opened. Cells learned to use it, to harness its power for energy. Instead of poisoning them, oxygen became their ally, fueling more complex, more vigorous lives. Step by step, life began to diversify, to expand in new directions. Think of it like this. Oxygen was the first true breath of the earth. It was as though the planet itself inhaled for the first time, filling its skies with the possibility of what was to come. Forests, flowers, birds, humans, all of it depended on this invisible revolution, begun not by towering trees, but by tiny drifting microbes, patient and persistent beyond measure. Sometimes it is humbling to realize that the greatest shifts in the story of our planet do not begin with a bang, but with a whisper. The cyanobacteria did not roar. They did not move quickly. They did not even seek to change the world. They simply lived their small lives, dividing, drifting, and quietly exhaling oxygen. And by doing so, over spans of time so long they escape our imagination, they transformed an entire planet. If you close your eyes, you might picture it. The ancient ocean, quiet at the surface, rippled only by wind. Beneath, countless tiny cells floating like dust in the water, catching the sunbeam that pierced the waves. A bubble of oxygen rising, then another. Minute after minute, year after year, until the air itself thickened with this unseen breath. Slowly, patiently, the world that would one day hold forests and fields was being prepared. There is a lesson in this patience. Plants, and their ancestors before them, do not rush. They do not chase or hurry. Their revolutions take place over millennia. Their movements are the movements of time itself. And yet, with this patience, they achieve what seems impossible. They build worlds. Without the cyanobacteria, there would be no atmosphere fit for us to breathe. Without them, no animals, no trees, no humans. The gift of oxygen, the invisible presence filling your lungs right now as you listen, was given first by these small and ancient lives. Every breath we take is an inheritance. It is remarkable to think that something so small could alter something so vast. But perhaps that is the nature of life on Earth. Greatness is not always in size or strength. Sometimes it lies in persistence, in quiet repetition, in the steady, humble act of turning sunlight into food and letting go of what is not needed until what is left over remakes the world. As oxygen spread across the Earth, new stories began to unfold. Life would experiment, diversify, and begin its long climb toward complexity. But still, for hundreds of millions of years, plants as we know them did not exist. The land was still barren, the shorelines empty. The seas belonged to microbes and their endless patience. Yet already the stage was being set. Already the chemistry of the air and water was shifting, preparing for the first brave steps onto land. The cyanobacteria had begun something they could never see to its end, something far greater than themselves. They had made Earth a place where plants could one day flourish. So when next you take a deep breath, remember the gift. Remember that within that invisible stream of oxygen is the legacy of tiny blue-green cells drifting in ancient seas. They whisper across billions of years. They remind us that even the smallest life can change the destiny of a planet. And they invite us to listen more closely, more patiently, to the quiet revolutions still unfolding all around us. After the oceans filled with oxygen and the air slowly transformed into something new, the Earth lingered in silence for a very long while. Life, which had learned to feast on sunlight and churn the chemistry of the seas, remained mostly where it had begun. Water was safety. It held and cradled delicate cells, muffled the harsh beating of sunlight, and carried nutrients like a slow, steady river. To leave that gentle medium and step onto exposed rock was to enter a world of extremes: drying wind, burning sun, and sharp temperature swings that could crack a tiny cell like glass. But sometimes the edge of possibility is irresistible. The shoreline offered a strange invitation. More light, new minerals dissolved in spray, no predators waiting among the sand. The land was empty and unclaimed. Over long, patient lifetimes, life began to explore the margin. The first travelers were not grand. They were thin films of green, tiny clusters clinging to wet stone, gathering where moisture lingered after a tide. These were the ancestors of mosses and liverworts, small, low, and astonishingly brave. Imagine a black basalt rock, still warm from a volcanic breath, sitting where waves break. After a retreating tide, the sun hits it with a blunt, unforgiving face. But in the sheltered cracks and shallow pools, a green sheen appears, a gathering of cells that learn to hold onto water and to shield themselves from the harshness. They stick close to the surface, growing dense mats so that when the wind blows, they lose only a little of their precious moisture. They develop waxy skins and tightly packed tissues that keep internal fluids from evaporating. They become masters of patience, pausing growth during drought and responding again when the next mist comes. To move on to land, these early plants invented solutions we now take for granted. They needed ways to prevent water from leaving their bodies too quickly. They needed protective pigments that could absorb or deflect damaging ultraviolet light. And they needed reproductive tricks, for in water, many cells simply drifted to meet one another. On land, meeting required new strategies. Spores became a common answer, tiny, tough packages that could ride the wind and wait for favorable conditions to germinate. They are simple and durable, an elegant answer to the problem of distance and dryness. Yet the story of these pioneers is not only one of survival, but of transformation. As mosses and their kin spread across the stone, they began to alter the very face of the land. Their acids and the gentle pressure of their mats teased at the rock, loosening particles and creating the raw beginnings of soil. Dust and organic debris gathered in their folds. Microbes multiplied in the moist microclimates they created. Seeds were not yet a part of this world, but the slow accretion of life-made matter meant that the substrate for future plants was forming beneath their feet. There is a tenderness in imagining these early carpets of green. They were fragile armies, softening a hard planet one tiny filament at a time. They turned barren coastline into a mosaic of living edges. Where a stone was once cold and sterile, now a tiny ecosystem could support insect ancestors, fungi, and bacterial partners. The world was quietly being prepared for greater things. As trials continued, evolution experimented. Some groups pushed upward, developing sturdier bodies and rudimentary tubes that could move water and nutrients a short distance. Others leaned into the low, creeping life, perfecting the art of clinging close to the ground. There were no forests yet, no tall trunks or sweeping canopies, but the concept of plant life stretching outward across the land was now possible. When you look at a cushion of moss on a shaded rock today, know that you are gazing at an echo of those first pioneers. Their solutions, waxy surfaces, spore-based reproduction, a love for damp microclimates, are strategies conserved across eons. Their arrival changed the climate too, though in ways subtle and slow. As mats of photosynthesizers accumulated on the continents, they drew down carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. That process, extended over vast spans of time, nudged global climates toward cooler states and began the long rearrangement of planetary chemistry. The air that once sheltered only the simplest microbes now became friendlier to more complex life forms. In time, the stage would be set for vascular plants, for tissues that could carry water efficiently, for leaves that could stretch and capture light, and for the forests that would one day hold songbirds and shade. But before those tall things, the mosses and liverworts reigned. They were modest in stature, but revolutionary in consequence. They taught the land how to be alive. They invented ecological niches where nothing had existed. They built the first soils, created the first sheltered places for small animals, and set in motion cycles of moisture and decay that would become the engine of terrestrial life. There is a quiet courage in this work. It asks us to reconsider what counts as success in evolution. It is not always the tallest, the fastest, or the most conspicuous who reshape a world. Sometimes it is the ones who cling, who wait, who slowly reorganize their environment by mere presence. In this light, the soft green that pads a rock is heroic. It is the patient beginning of the verdant chapters that follow. Night became a friend in these places. Where daylight burned and dried, the slow return of night brought dew and a hushed humidity. The earliest land plants learned to time their lives to such rhythms. In the cool quiet after sunset, they drank what little moisture the air would offer. Even before complex pores evolved, These pioneers timed their lives to moisture's coming and going, opening and closing chemical doors with the night and the tide. They lived in moments as much as they lived in places. A single fog, a single cool night, could be the difference between life and death. These patterns carved out spaces for others. Fungi, long partners of life in the seas, crept into the damp layers the plants created. Microbial communities formed, exchanging nutrients and subtle trades. A thin film of green did more than survive. It became a hub where matter cycled, where carbon fixed by sunlight entered the nascent soil food web. In this way, the pioneers acted as architects, inviting complexity into a place that had been simple and bare. There is one quiet invention worth lingering upon: the idea of holding on. Many of these early plants developed structures called rhizoids, not true roots like those of trees, but tiny, hair-like anchors that gripped stone and sediment and drew in water. With every grasp, the plant tugged at the surface, making tiny fractures, creating niches where seeds and spores might lodge later on. This slow mechanical weathering, coupled with chemical changes produced by organic acids, began to convert hard rock into crumbly earth. And with soil came the possibilities of depth. The first pockets of soil could hold water longer, offer protection from drying winds, and shelter developing life from ultraviolet scorch. In such pockets, evolution was given room to try new forms. Some lineages experimented with raised stems, or simple channels that moved water a little farther than diffusion allowed. Others perfected the low, cushion-like habits that kept them perpetually close to moisture, letting them survive where taller forms would fail. Consider the quiet, patient mathematics of time here. A generation of moss is short. A generation of rock is measured in eons. Yet slowly, through countless small lifetimes, the green lived and died and enriched the ground. Organic matter, the decay of countless tiny plants, became humus. Humus is not glamorous, but it is miraculous. A soft, dark sponge that retains water and cradles seeds. It is the birth mother of complexity on land. Where a single pebble had once been sterile, a patch of humus could allow a more ambitious plant to take root and reach upward. History remembers the dramatic, the first amphibian crawling out of the surf, the first tree towering above the plain. But beneath those headlines lies a quieter chorus: the mosses and liverworts, the filmy pioneers who reorganized continents with microbe-sized labor. Their work shows us another tempo of change, one that does not break the world, but remakes it slowly by adding layer upon layer, patience upon patience. So when you next pass a shady bank, or notice a green mat along a stream, let yourself slow and consider the deep time beneath your feet. These soft greens are not merely decorations. They are the first pages of the terrestrial story, the initial sentences in the long book of woodland life. They remind us that great transformations often begin with modest persistence, with species that choose the narrow, difficult way, and by doing so, create new possibilities for all who follow. When we last left the green world, it was still fragile, clinging to damp stone, and the edges of water, held together by delicate mosses and liverworts, they crept close to the moist earth. They were small and vulnerable, needing the comfort of wet places, unable yet to move too far from the liquid cradle that had sheltered their ancestors for billions of years. And yet, they represented a promise. With every spore released into the wind, with every new patch of land colonized by their soft green mats, the stage was being set for a deeper transformation. For nature has always been a patient architect, and plants are among her slowest builders. They did not rush. They did not conquer with haste. Instead, they expanded by persistence, testing the boundaries of possibility with each new generation, each subtle adaptation. And in time, they developed the tools that would allow them to step more confidently onto land, to anchor themselves into the very bones of the earth, and to reach upward toward the sky. The first of these great inventions was the vascular system, the hidden plumbing that would allow plants to transport water and nutrients from one part of their body to another. In the oceans, this was unnecessary. The surrounding water bathed their cells, carrying what they needed. Even on damp shorelines, mosses could absorb moisture directly through their leaves. But to live beyond the constant embrace of water, something more was required. A plant needed a way to sip from the earth itself, to draw nourishment from deep within the ground, and to send it upward against gravity, all the way to leaves that thirsted for sunlight. And so, within the quiet experiments of evolution, strands of conducting tissue began to form. Xylem and phloem, though we do not need to linger on their names, were the threads of this new life. They were channels that carried water, minerals, sugars, and signals, transforming plants from low mats hugging the ground into organisms that could rise, stretch, and branch. With these channels, plants were no longer bound to crawl. They could stand. They could grow tall. Imagine that moment stretched across millions of years, when the first upright stems pushed out of the soft green carpets of moss. They were small, fragile stalks, hardly more than a few centimeters high, but they were a revolution. For the first time, plants could elevate themselves into the air, gaining access to light that was unobstructed by neighbors. They could spread spores farther, catching the wind from a greater height. And in that extra elevation, they could begin to create shade, altering the microclimates around them. To support this newfound height, another innovation was needed: roots. Mosses had rhizoids, thread-like structures that gripped the soil loosely, but true roots were deeper, stronger, and more ambitious. They reached down into the darkness, probing through rock and sediment, breaking apart stone grain by grain. With roots came stability. Plants could now anchor themselves firmly in place, resistant to wind and weather. But roots were more than anchors. They were explorers, searching for water hidden beneath the surface, finding veins of minerals, creating networks that would eventually entwine with fungi in partnerships of astonishing intimacy. Above the ground, meanwhile, leaves began to expand. The early mosses had small, flat outgrowths, but with vascular tissues feeding them, leaves could grow larger, thinner, broader. And in their green membranes, filled with chlorophyll, sunlight could be captured more efficiently than ever before. A larger leaf meant more surface for photosynthesis, more sugars to fuel growth, more energy to invest in reproduction. Taken together, these changes, stems, roots, leaves, and vascular tissues, transformed the plant kingdom into something entirely new. The land, once a barren and silent expanse, began to change its character. Slowly, steadily, the green world grew taller, thicker, and more complex. Now imagine yourself standing on the shoreline of a Devonian landscape some 400 million years ago. The air is warm and heavy, the sky hazy with volcanic gases, the land a patchwork of rocky outcrops, muddy floodplains, and shallow streams. At first glance, the terrain seems empty, barren compared to the lush forests we know today. But if you look closer, you would see patches of green creeping outward from the water's edge. Small vascular plants, some only ankle-high, lift their spindly stalks. Their stems branch into forked patterns, their tops bearing tiny sporangia, the capsules that release spores into the wind. They are the first pioneers of a new age. Over millions of years, these pioneers diversified. Some grew taller, experimenting with woody tissues that could provide greater support. Others spread wider, sending roots deeper and farther. Insects, too, were beginning to appear on land, tiny creatures scuttling among the stems. And as plants expanded, they created habitats, offering shade and shelter where none had existed before. The once bare landscapes became dotted with groves of strange, primitive vegetation, a far cry from the trees we know, but forests in their own right. The air itself was changing. With each breath of photosynthesis, oxygen levels climbed. Carbon dioxide, abundant in the ancient atmosphere, was slowly drawn down as plants locked it away in their tissues and roots. The climate cooled, weather patterns shifted, and soils deepened as roots broke rock into fertile ground. Plants were not simply decorating the land, they were remaking it, turning stone into soil, air into breath, light into the fuel of ecosystems yet to come. One of the most remarkable developments of this time was the rise of the first true trees. They were not like oaks or pines, but rather strange ancestors such as Archaeopteris, a towering giant of the Devonian world. Archaeopteris could grow over 30 meters tall, with woody trunks and branching canopies that cast deep shadows below. For the first time in Earth's history, the land was graced with towering forests. Picture the hush beneath those primeval trees. Fern-like fronds stretched overhead, filtering the sunlight into patterns of green shade. Beneath them, the air was damp and cool, carrying the scent of moss and soil. The ground, once bare, now bore layers of decaying plant matter, feeding fungi, microbes, and the earliest soil invertebrates. In this dim world, ecosystems began to flourish, insects buzzing in the filtered light, early amphibians creeping from the water to explore, the pulse of new life beating in rhythm with the green above. Forests were more than gatherings of trees. They were engines of transformation. As roots spread and leaves fell, as trunks grew and decayed, they altered the very chemistry of the planet. Carbon was drawn down and stored in wood. Oxygen poured out into the sky, and for the first time, the Earth experienced the cooling touch of widespread vegetation. The world's climate shifted, and with it, the course of life itself. All of this, remember, happened not in a rush, but in the slow tempo of plants. From our perspective, it is easy to see the grand sweep of history, the march from mosses to forests. But to the plants themselves, each step was patient, cautious, unfolding over millions upon millions of seasons. To walk among them, it would not feel like standing at the front of a revolution, but rather wandering through a landscape quietly, persistently changing. And yet, it was precisely that persistence that gave rise to the conditions for everything that followed. Plants built soils, shaped atmospheres, and created the first terrestrial ecosystems capable of sustaining large, complex animals. Without them, vertebrates would never have left the water. Without them, insects would never have found habitats in which to diversify. Without them, we ourselves would have no place to stand, no air to breathe, no food to eat. The hidden life of plants is not only about what they are now, but about what they made possible then. And as the first forests spread across the continents, as roots gnawed into the bones of mountains and leaves fed the hungry sky, the stage was being set for yet another transformation, one in which plants would learn to collaborate with unseen partners, building vast, underground networks of communication and exchange. But that is a story for another stretch of our journey. As the first forests spread across the continents, they became something more than just clusters of tall plants. They were experiments in complexity, reaching both upward into the air and downward into the soil, weaving new dimensions of life that had never existed before. Each trunk was a column of living architecture, each root a path of exploration beneath the surface, each leaf a solar sail drinking light and exhaling breath. In these vast, shaded groves, the future of the land was being written in patient strokes of green. To imagine these forests is to see a world that is both alien and familiar. Towering trunks rose above the ground, but their forms were not yet those of modern trees. Some resembled giant horsetails, their segmented stalks lifting like tall reeds into the sky. Others looked like immense club mosses, with scaly, rough exteriors and crowns of branching fronds. Still others were fern-like, their leaves spreading wide, unfurling in spirals that echoed the gentle geometry of seashells and galaxies. Together, they formed the first true canopies, creating an upstairs and a downstairs to the land, a division of space that shaped how air and water and life moved through the environment. Beneath this canopy, the atmosphere was transformed. Sunlight, once harsh on bare ground, now filtered through curtains of green. The air grew cooler, more humid, carrying the rich scents of plant resins and the damp sweetness of decay. Fallen leaves and branches built the first true forest floors, softening the ground and layering it with organic matter. Insects crept and buzzed in this underworld, nibbling on plant tissues, recycling nutrients, and in doing so, forming the beginnings of the soil communities that still support forests today. And below that, hidden from view, roots and fungi were joining hands. Long before humans named it, the collaboration between plants and fungi had already begun, deep in the shadows of the earth. Mycorrhizal partnerships, in which fungi thread themselves into plant roots, exchanging nutrients for sugars, were quietly knitting the underground into networks of cooperation. Fungal threads stretched outward through the soil, finding minerals and water that roots alone could not reach. In return, the plants offered the fungi a share of their energy, crafted from sunlight. This symbiosis, ancient and enduring, became the invisible foundation on which forests would flourish. As the forests thickened, their influence spread far beyond their boundaries. Rain patterns shifted, for forests release moisture into the air, feeding clouds, drawing rains to lands that would otherwise remain dry. Carbon dioxide, pulled steadily from the atmosphere, lowered global temperatures, setting the stage for new evolutionary experiments. Oxygen, poured into the sky in abundance, made it possible for animals to grow larger, to become more active, to explore niches that had never existed before. Amphibians, emerging from the water, found refuge in the shade of these green cathedrals. Insects, newly evolved with wings, darted among the leaves. Life was cascading outward in ripples, each wave triggered by the still and silent labor of plants. The forests themselves were not silent in the truest sense. Though they made no noise in the way animals do, they filled the world with a different kind of music. The rustle of leaves in the wind, the creak of trunks swaying, the patter of rain dripping through layered canopies, the soft sigh of spores released into the air. This was the soundscape of the Devonian and Carboniferous forests, a music not of voices, but of patterns, not of calls, but of whispers. Over time, plants grew bolder in their designs. Wood became stronger, tissues more specialized. Seeds began to appear, tiny packages of life wrapped in protective coats, able to travel farther, wait longer, and survive harsher conditions than fragile spores. With seeds, plants gained a new kind of freedom. No longer tied so tightly to water for reproduction, they could spread across drier lands, colonizing environments that spores alone could not endure. Seeds were promises, promises that life could begin again, carried on the wind, dropped by streams, even eventually transported by animals. And yet, as forests transformed the earth, they also set in motion challenges of their own making. When vast amounts of carbon were drawn from the air and locked away in trunks and roots, the planet cooled. Ice spread at the poles. Entire climates shifted. The abundance of oxygen, while a gift to animals, also made fire more common, for dry plant matter could ignite with ease. Forests, it seemed, were both creators and destroyers, giving life with one hand and reshaping its conditions with the other. Still, their persistence was unshaken. Through fire, flood, and ice, forests adapted. They shed leaves, dropped seeds, and regrew after catastrophe. For that is the rhythm of plants. Not resistance, but resilience. They bend, they break, they return. They have no need to hurry, for they measure time not in moments, but in centuries. To walk in one of those ancient forests, if such a journey were possible, would be to witness a world at once familiar and foreign. You would stand among trunks thicker than a house, stretching toward a sun that filtered down in broken beams. You would smell resin and damp wood, hear the crackle of insects in the undergrowth. You might see dragonflies with wingspans wider than a hawk's, gliding between branches. Beneath your feet, the soil would be soft, alive with roots and fungi, each thread and tendril part of a hidden web that bound the forest together. Even then, in those earliest forests, the qualities that define plants today were already present: patience, persistence, quiet transformation. They were architects working not with stone or fire, but with sunlight and air, building vast living structures that remade the planet. They did not conquer land with speed or violence, but with endurance. They simply grew, season by season, until the face of the earth itself was changed. And in that change lay a promise. For plants are not merely passive scenery, not background to the drama of animals. They are the stage itself, the oxygen in the lungs of every creature, the soil beneath every step, the food that fuels every heartbeat. From the moment they stepped onto land, they began weaving the conditions in which all future life would thrive. The forests of those ages have long since vanished, their trunks buried, their carbon locked away in stone and coal. But their legacy remains in every tree that shades our parks, every fern that curls in damp shadows, every seed that waits for spring. When we see a forest today, we are seeing echoes of a revolution that began hundreds of millions of years ago. A revolution carried out not with battles, but with the slow unfolding of leaves, the steady reach of roots, the endless patience of green. And so, the story of plants on land is not just the story of mosses and trees, of roots and seeds. It is the story of how earth became habitable, of how barren rock became fertile ground, of how breathless skies became rich with air. It is the story of how life was given room to expand, to diversify, to dream of flight and fur and feather. It is, in many ways, the story of the world we inherited. And though this chapter in the tale of plants comes to a close, the next one is already waiting. For as forests spread and roots dug deeper, a hidden world was forming below our feet. A world of soil, of fungi, of whispered exchanges between roots and neighbors. A world that would prove just as vital as the leaves above. But for now, let us pause in the shade of those ancient trees, listening to the hush of a forest still new, and feel the patience of plants lingering all around us. When we think of a forest, we often picture what stands above the ground, the trunks stretching upward, the leaves unfurling in the light, the canopy that sways with the wind. But in truth, the forest begins where we cannot see. Its heart lies in the soil, in the dark, damp spaces where roots explore, where fungi weave their threads, where stones are slowly ground into nourishment, and where the invisible breath of life is held in every grain. Long ago, before roots existed, the land was naked. Rocks lay bare, their surfaces weathered only by wind, rain, and the occasional film of microbial life. Nutrients were locked within stone, inaccessible to the fragile green pioneers that clung to the edges of rivers and streams. Without roots, plants could only gather what little water and minerals touched their surfaces. Growth was limited, survival precarious. But the invention of roots changed everything. Roots were more than anchors to keep plants steady against the wind. They were explorers, miners, alchemists. They reached into the cracks of stone and soil, prying apart grains of rock, secreting acids that dissolved minerals, unlocking treasures that had been sealed away since the earth's crust first cooled. With every season, with every tendril pushing deeper, roots transformed lifeless ground into fertile earth. Imagine standing on a rocky plain hundreds of millions of years ago, before roots had reshaped it. The ground is hard, unyielding. Dust collects in shallow depressions, but true soil has yet to form. Now imagine the slow arrival of rooted plants. Their tendrils slip into cracks, their tips pressing forward grain by grain. Over years, centuries, millennia, they break the rock apart. Rainwater trickles down alongside them, carrying dissolved minerals. Tiny fragments of decayed plant matter accumulate, mixing with the broken rock. And so, inch by inch, the first soils are born. Soil is easy to overlook, Yet it is one of the most extraordinary creations on Earth. It is not just dirt, not just crushed stone. It is a living skin, a thin, fragile layer that covers the planet like a blanket. Within it, minerals mingle with organic matter, and life swarms invisibly. Bacteria, fungi, tiny worms, and insects make their homes there. Together, they cycle nutrients, store carbon, and hold water like a sponge. All of this begins with roots, for without roots to feed it with carbon and withered leaves, soil would be barren. Roots are not solitary. They reach out and branch, forming patterns that mirror rivers and streams. They fork and divide, each tip sensing moisture and chemicals, choosing where to grow next. They are not random in their search. They are guided by gradients of water, by hints of minerals, by the invisible signatures of neighboring roots. A root tip, only millimeters across, is a sensitive explorer. It feels its way forward, not blindly, but with awareness, capable of detecting obstacles and adjusting its course. When roots meet fungi, something extraordinary happens. Fungal filaments, called hyphae, are far finer than any root hair. They weave into the soil like threads in a fabric, extending the reach of the plant many times over. Where a root alone might explore centimeters, fungi can travel meters. They infiltrate tiny pores between soil grains, extracting phosphorus, nitrogen, and trace elements that the plant cannot access on its own. In return, the plant shares sugars, the currency of light, feeding the fungi with energy distilled from the sun. This partnership is ancient, dating back to the earliest land plants. It was likely fungi that first helped plants survive beyond the water, granting them access to nutrients in exchange for food. In a sense, the conquest of land was not the achievement of plants alone, but of plants and fungi together, bound in a quiet alliance. Even today, most plants you see, from the smallest grasses to the tallest trees, rely on these fungal partners. The forest floor is alive with invisible trade routes, a constant barter of minerals and sugars, whispered through networks that span entire groves. The soil born of roots and fungi did more than feed plants. It reshaped the planet itself. With deep soils came stability. Rivers that once ran wild across barren rock now found their courses slowed by vegetation. Roots held the ground in place, reducing erosion, guiding the flow of water into channels. Floodplains began to collect sediments, enriched with decaying leaves. Wetlands formed, buzzing with new life. The surface of Earth became softer, more varied, more capable of sustaining the diversity that was waiting to unfold. Above the ground, the effect was just as profound. With more nutrients available, plants could grow larger, sturdier, more complex. Forests thickened, canopies layered. As their trunks rose, so too did their shadows deepen, creating cooler, damper habitats below. Insects thrived in this complexity, feeding on leaves, burrowing into wood, pollinating the early flowers that would one day evolve. Amphibians found refuge in the dampness, while reptiles, newly experimenting with life beyond water, explored the stability of forest floors. Every branch, every root, every fallen log was a niche, a home, a possibility. But perhaps the most lasting gift of roots was their ability to lock carbon away. When roots reached into the soil and when forests grew dense, carbon was drawn from the atmosphere and buried underground in the form of decaying matter. Over millions of years, this carbon accumulated, compressed into layers of peat, coal, and stone. In doing so, plants cooled the earth, temperatures dropped, ice spread at the poles, and oxygen levels soared. It was a planetary-scale engineering project, carried out slowly, invisibly, and without intention, simply through the persistence of growth and decay. Think of the patience of this process. A root tip pushes forward no faster than a few centimeters a day. A tree may take decades to mature, centuries to tower. Soil takes thousands of years to build into rich layers. And yet, Over millions of years, the persistence of roots remade the earth. The barren continents of stone became living landscapes, dressed in forests, fed by rivers, covered in fertile ground. The skin of soil that we take for granted today is the accumulated labor of countless generations of plants and their fungal allies. And within this soil lies memory. Each layer records the passing of seasons, the remains of fallen leaves, the shells of tiny creatures, the soot of ancient fires. To dig into the earth is to read a story written by time itself, a diary kept not in words, but in textures and colors, and traces of what once lived. Roots are both authors and readers of this story, writing with every penetration into stone, reading with every branching into nutrient-rich layers. To walk barefoot on the ground is to touch the legacy of this hidden revolution. Every handful of soil is a cosmos of life, billions of microbes in a pinch, threads of fungi stretching unseen, fragments of minerals that once lay locked in mountains. It is humbling to realize that this soft ground, so ordinary beneath our feet, is one of the rarest things in the universe. Planets may have rock, dust, or ice, but soil, true living soil, is the creation of plants. Without it, life would be thin, scattered, fragile. With it, life becomes abundant. The invention of roots, then, was not a small step, but a great turning point. It was the key that unlocked the land for all that followed. Roots anchored plants, created soil, partnered with fungi, reshaped rivers, and altered the climate. They were the unseen architects, carving the foundations of ecosystems that would last for hundreds of millions of years. Even today, as you pass a tree, it is easy to forget that half of it lies below the ground, hidden from sight. Roots spread far beyond the reach of branches, twisting and dividing, touching the lives of neighboring plants. In some forests, the underground network is larger, older, and more complex than the trees themselves. What we see above is only the tip of an iceberg of life. What lies below is the quiet machinery that sustains it all. And so, when we look at a forest, we must remember to look not only up, but down. For beneath the leaves, beneath the trunks, beneath the fallen needles and soft moss, there is a world of dark corridors, of searching tendrils, of whispered exchanges between species. It is a world of patience and persistence, of resilience and reciprocity. It is the hidden half of plants, without which the surface would crumble. The roots had dug deep, and the world had changed forever. Once, land was mostly bare stone, streaked with thin soils that washed away in the rain. Now, those hidden tendrils anchored life in place, gripping the ground so firmly that rivers were slowed, floods softened, and sediments settled into new layers of earth. Slowly, imperceptibly, landscapes were no longer only shaped by wind and water, but also by plants. A forest was more than a gathering of trees above ground. It was a cathedral with unseen foundations, a living architecture rising from soil that itself was created by the patient labor of roots. Imagine those early forests, strange, otherworldly, yet also familiar. Towering trunks stretched skyward, not yet the oaks and pines we know, but ancestors with simpler designs, spore-bearing rather than seed-making. Their leaves were not yet broad and veined, but resembled fronds, simple flat green panels drinking light. Beneath them, the air was cool, shadows pooling in new ways. For the first time, shade had weight, and the ground was a dim green twilight. Beneath that dimness, roots intertwined with fungi. This partnership, born in ancient soils, was one of life's most profound alliances. Fungi slipped into the tiny pores of roots, forming intimate connections with their host plants. The fungi drew in minerals from the soil, capturing phosphorus and nitrogen, while the plants fed them sugars made from sunlight. Together, they built a network that turned bare dirt into fertile ground, expanding the very capacity of Earth to host life. If you could stand in one of those early forests and close your eyes, you might hear what seemed like silence. But in truth, beneath your feet, a quiet marketplace thrived. Nutrients were traded. Messages were sent. Roots extended feelers into new spaces, searching for water, for balance, for the sustenance that would keep their green towers standing tall. These forests began to trap carbon dioxide from the air in a way no ecosystem before them had achieved. With their vast leaf surfaces, they breathed in CO and exhaled oxygen, changing the balance of gases in the atmosphere. Over time, this drew temperatures downward, cooling the planet. Ice sheets advanced. Glaciers carved valleys. The rise of forests may have helped trigger entire ice ages, not through any plan, but simply through the power of photosynthesis scaled up to continental levels. Life responded to the new architecture. Insects, which had already tested their wings in earlier eras, now found labyrinths of wood and leaf in which to hide, feed, and multiply. Amphibians, crawling from rivers and swamps, sheltered beneath roots and among fallen trunks. Each plant was a fortress, a source of shade and moisture, a miniature ecosystem unto itself. The forest was more than the sum of its parts. It was an entirely new stage upon which evolution could unfold. The rivers ran differently, too. With roots binding the banks, floods no longer stripped soil bare. Instead, water meandered through meadows and woodlands, carrying nutrients farther inland. The presence of trees slowed erosion and allowed sediments to build fertile floodplains. In these zones, new communities of plants took hold, extending green life across wider ranges. Eventually, true wood evolved, dense, fibrous tissue capable of lifting trees higher and higher. The invention of wood was nothing less than revolutionary. It allowed plants to grow far taller than before, competing for light in ways mosses and ferns could not match. Forests became not just patches of greenery, but towering realms. The canopy, those high, sunlit leaves, created a ceiling of life, while the understory below developed into its own world, full of shadows, moss, and quiet dampness. With wood came longevity. Trees could now live not for years, but for centuries, their growth rings recording the passage of time like the lines of a diary. Each ring whispered of seasons of drought and years of abundance, of fires survived and storms endured. They stood as witnesses to Earth's slow transformations, rooted in place, while generations of other creatures rose and fell around them. Beneath this rising canopy, soil deepened further. Fallen trunks decomposed, enriched by fungi and bacteria that broke wood into humus. This new richness fed the next generation of seedlings, which sprouted in the shadow of their parents. Forests had invented continuity, a self-sustaining cycle where each death nourished new life. The invention of soil, as we know it, the dark, living fabric of Earth's surface, was inseparable from the invention of forests. Without plants, there would be no soil. Without soil, the tapestry of terrestrial life would have nowhere to root itself. The partnership was permanent. Forests did more than change the ground beneath them. They changed the very air above. By pumping moisture from roots to leaves and out through tiny pores, trees filled the sky with water vapor. This transpiration formed clouds, which drifted inland, carrying rain where once there had only been arid rock. Forests became climate machines, recycling rain and sustaining themselves with their own weather. Whole continents began to green because trees pulled water into the air, seeded clouds, and made rain fall again and again. In this way, forests were not passive occupants of land, but active engineers of ecosystems, shaping rivers, soil, and atmosphere alike. To walk through such a forest, if we could, would be to feel Earth in the act of remaking itself. The trunks soared like columns, the canopy rippled with filtered light, and the floor was alive with ferns, spores, and early insects. Yet beyond the beauty, there was power. Forests became global regulators, the steady lungs of the planet. And slowly, animals began to take notice. Herbivores adapted to new diets of leaves, spores, and wood. Carnivores followed. Entire food chains rearranged themselves around this green abundance. The presence of tall plants offered protection and habitat for creatures that had once only known open ground or shallow wetlands. Birds would one day find perches in branches. Mammals would scamper in shadows. But even in these early forests, the stage was set for diversity. The forest was no longer just a cluster of plants. It was a whole new planet nested within the old one. It's easy to forget, looking at a tree today, that it carries within its form this ancient legacy of transformation. Roots binding the soil, wood reaching skyward, leaves breathing in carbon and exhaling life. A single oak or pine is the descendant of those first great experiments in vertical living. Each forest around us is a living echo of the time when plants discovered how to shape not just themselves, but the entire world. And the influence of those decisions stretches even to us, here, now, in the present moment. Every breath we take is a continuation of that long-ago choice, when roots burrowed deep, leaves spread wide, and forests rose to rewrite the story of Earth. For most of human history, the idea that plants could think, or sense, or communicate seemed almost absurd. They do not have faces we can read, or voices we can hear, or footsteps that echo across the ground. They appear so still, so silent, so resigned to their place that we mistake their patience for passivity. And yet, when we look closely, when we slow ourselves to their timescale, we discover a world alive with perception and choice. Plants are not passive backdrops to the story of life. They are active participants, constantly sensing, responding, and adjusting to the world around them. Imagine for a moment standing in a quiet meadow. To our eyes, it seems serene, almost unmoving. But hidden in every leaf and root is a hum of activity. A blade of grass bends slightly toward the sun, its cells stretching on one side to reorient its narrow body toward the light. A flower closes its petals as dusk falls, retreating from the cool night air. Tiny hairs on a vine brush against a fence post, and feeling the contact, the plant begins to curl its tendrils around the support, climbing higher. These movements happen slowly, too slowly for us to notice in real time. But with patience, or with the help of time-lapse cameras, we see that plants are always moving, always sensing, always acting. The first and most fundamental sense of plants is light. Sunlight is their lifeblood, their constant companion, and their source of energy. But plants do not simply soak in light like sponges. They read it. They interpret its angle, its color, its intensity. A seedling growing beneath the shade of taller neighbors can detect the subtle change in light wavelength caused by leaves filtering the sun above. That shift tells the young plant that it must stretch higher, racing toward brightness before it is smothered in shadow. Leaves turn and twist not randomly, but with exquisite precision, following the sun's arc across the sky. Even roots, buried in darkness, sense light faintly and recoil from it, ensuring they stay safely underground. Plants, in this way, live within a vast map of illumination, adjusting constantly to the shifting patterns of day and season. But light is only one of their senses. Plants feel touch as well. Consider the sensitive mimosa plant. Its compound leaves fold inward with the gentlest brush of a finger, collapsing as though startled. The Venus flytrap snaps shut when tiny hairs inside its trap are disturbed twice in quick succession, a mechanism that distinguishes real prey from false alarms, like raindrops. These movements are not controlled by nerves, but by shifts in water pressure and electrical signals across cell membranes. Still, the effect is striking plants that respond almost instantly to the presence of another. They are aware of contact. They register touch. Beneath the soil, roots explore with a similar sensitivity. A root tip pressing through earth will pause when it meets a stone, hesitate, then adjust its path, curving around the obstacle. It seeks the path of least resistance, responding to pressure and space. Some roots even grow toward the vibrations of running water, sensing acoustic cues that we might never imagine they could perceive. In their dark world underground, roots navigate as if they carried a map of touch and sound combined. And then there is the question of memory. Plants do not have brains, but they do carry the capacity to remember past experiences. A mimosa plant, once startled by repeated touches, learns not to close its leaves when the stimulus proves harmless. Weeks later, it still remembers this lesson, remaining calm in the face of familiar, harmless triggers. Seeds, too, carry memory. A seed buried in winter soil can count the days of cold it endures, ensuring it only germinates once spring has truly arrived. Without this memory, a warm spell in midwinter might trick it into sprouting too early, dooming it to frost. Instead, plants measure and recall the passage of time, holding within their tissues a sense of the seasons. Communication, too, is part of their hidden life. When a caterpillar begins chewing on a leaf, the injured plant releases chemical signals into the air. These airborne cries alert neighboring plants, which respond by priming their defenses, thickening their leaves, or producing bitter compounds to ward off herbivores. It is as though one tree whispers to another, "Be ready, danger is near." In some species, the signals are so specific that they carry information about the type of attacker. A plant nibbled by aphids may release one scent, while a plant grazed by beetles sends another. The surrounding plants receive not only a warning, but also a clue about what threat to prepare for. This conversation is not limited to the air. Underground, roots and fungi exchange messages through chemical signals, forming networks where nutrients and alerts travel alike. When one plant suffers drought, it can trigger others nearby to close their stomata, conserving water. When one is attacked by disease, its neighbors can receive advance notice and strengthen their defenses. The soil becomes a kind of whispering gallery, filled with exchanges we cannot hear. There is even evidence that plants may perceive sounds directly. Experiments have shown that the roots of young seedlings grow toward the faint trickle of water, responding not to moisture itself, but to the sound of water moving. Some flowers release more nectar when exposed to the buzz of a pollinating bee, as though tuning themselves to the frequencies of their visitors. To think of plants as deaf and mute is to misunderstand them. They listen in their own way. They speak with chemicals and vibrations. They are fluent in a language alien to us, yet ancient and unbroken. When we frame intelligence only in terms of human abilities, speech, movement, problem solving, it is easy to dismiss plants. But if intelligence is the ability to sense, to learn, to adapt, and to communicate, then forests are filled with quiet geniuses. A vine that finds its way up a tree trunk, adjusting its growth with every twist and turn, is solving problems. A tree that remembers a year of drought and adjusts its leaf production in the following season is learning from the past. A meadow of wildflowers signaling to pollinators with colors and scents is a community engaged in constant conversation. The scale of these abilities challenges our sense of time. Plants live slowly, and their intelligence is stretched across days, seasons, lifetimes. To us, a seedling leaning toward light seems imperceptible, its progress lost in the slowness of its growth. But to the seedling, to the forest, these movements are everything, decisions that shape survival, gestures that carry meaning. Perhaps our mistake is in assuming that intelligence must be quick to be real. A cheetah's sprint is dazzling, but so is the patience of a tree growing a ring each year, calculating with each cell division how best to endure. When we walk through a forest, we pass among countless ongoing conversations. Leaves exchanging signals about sunlight and pests. Roots whispering of drought and minerals. Flowers listening for the wing beats of bees. Every tree, every shrub, every patch of moss is engaged in dialogue with its environment and its neighbors. To call it a silent world is only to admit that we cannot hear its frequencies. The forest is not quiet. It is eloquent. And in this eloquence lies a humbling truth. Plants, the very beings we overlook, are continuously solving the puzzle of how to live. They calculate without numbers, communicate without words, and remember without brains. Their intelligence is not ours, but it is no less real. It surrounds us in every garden, every park, every patch of wild green pushing through cracks in a city sidewalk. The forest, when seen as a community of intelligence, begins to look different. It is no longer just a collection of individual trees, each competing for light and water, each struggling alone. It is instead a society, bound together by roots, by fungi, by air and leaf and scent. What one tree feels, another may learn. What one endures, another may avoid. There is competition, of course, but there is also collaboration. And in the slow rhythm of plants, these forces weave together into something resembling wisdom. Consider, for instance, the way young seedlings survive in the shadow of giants. A tiny sapling sprouting beneath the canopy of an old tree cannot reach the sun. By ordinary logic, it should wither, starved of light. And yet often it does not. That is because the parent tree, or others nearby, will share some of their energy through underground networks of fungi. Sugars made in the tall leaves above are passed into roots, transferred through fungal threads, and delivered to the shaded young. In this way, the great trees act as guardians, nursing the next generation until they are strong enough to grow into the light. Scientists sometimes call the oldest, largest of these mother trees, for they seem to nurture their kin and even unrelated neighbors. In the language of the forest, generosity is as real as rivalry. The fungi that make this possible are astonishing in themselves. Their filaments, thinner than hairs, spread outward through soil, like threads of silk. They link one root to another, weaving together thousands of trees into a single web of exchange. Through this network, carbon flows, nitrogen flows, information flows. The fungi benefit by receiving sugars from the plants, while the plants gain access to minerals gathered from far beyond the reach of their own roots. It is a symbiosis that has lasted for hundreds of millions of years, shaping ecosystems across every continent. If you could see the forest floor not with your eyes, but with some deeper sense, you would notice it glowing with hidden highways of life, a network as intricate as any city. Through these highways, warning signals also travel. A tree attacked by insects can send alerts through the fungal web, triggering others nearby to produce defensive chemicals. The message is not shouted, but whispered, subtle yet effective. It is as though the forest has nerves stretching invisibly beneath our feet. And because of this, no tree is ever truly alone. Each one is part of a community larger than itself, a collective intelligence spread across acres, perhaps even miles. Some experiments suggest that plants can make decisions, weighing options before acting. A climbing vine, when presented with two supports, may hesitate, swaying back and forth before choosing which to grasp. Its choice is not random, but guided by the subtle information it gathers: flexibility, stability, distance. Sunflowers, too, adjust their growth based on the presence of their neighbors, orienting their faces not only toward the sun, but in ways that maximize group efficiency, minimizing shade cast upon one another. There is, in these gestures, the ghost of strategy. Plants, in their quiet way, solve problems of survival, choosing paths that balance self-interest with the broader needs of the community. Even in their battles, there is nuance. Some plants release chemicals into the soil that hinder the growth of rivals, a form of sabotage known as allelopathy. A black walnut tree, for instance, exudes compounds that make it difficult for other species to thrive too close. Yet in doing so, it also creates space for its own seedlings, ensuring a legacy. Others take a different path, thriving best when surrounded by a mix of species, benefiting from diversity. Meadows of wildflowers, prairies of grasses, rainforests of countless intertwined forms, all demonstrate that cooperation and variety often bring resilience greater than any single species can achieve alone. This raises a question that has fascinated many. Do plants recognize one another? The evidence suggests they do. Experiments show that plants often grow more cooperatively when surrounded by their kin, shading less, sharing more, avoiding unnecessary conflict. Strangers, meanwhile, are treated with more competition. Roots grow differently depending on who they encounter. A family sense exists, though it is not built on faces or voices, but on subtle chemical cues, on recognition written into the very chemistry of life. And when we think about time, we begin to see how different their intelligence truly is. A tree might live for centuries, even millennia. Its perspective is not ours. Decisions made in one season may unfold in another. A seed dropped to the forest floor may wait years before sprouting, biding its time until light breaks through the canopy above. There is patience here that we can barely comprehend. For us, waiting is hard. For plants, waiting is life itself. This patience allows them to endure. Fires sweep through forests, and still, beneath the ash, roots slumber, ready to sprout again. Drought parches the land, and still seeds lie hidden, capable of awakening decades later. Some seeds, buried deep in desert sands, wait not just years, but centuries for rain, their tiny forms carrying a memory of conditions they have never seen. Their intelligence is stored in dormancy, in knowing not when to act, but when not to act. To walk among plants is to walk among beings who live in a different tempo. We measure in hours and days. They measure in seasons and centuries. Our perception of intelligence is tied to speed. We admire the quick, the agile, the immediate. But in the slowness of plants, there is a different kind of brilliance, an intelligence of patience, of endurance, of subtle adaptation stretched across deep time. And yet, for all their differences, we are bound to them. Our lives are knitted into their networks. We breathe the air they make. We eat the food they create. Our shelters, our medicines, our stories are entangled with theirs. We carry them in our myths as wise beings, world trees, sacred groves, guardians of knowledge. Perhaps even before science revealed their hidden communication, we sensed it, the quiet, mysterious awareness that seems to radiate from a forest at dusk, or from a single ancient tree standing alone on a hill. What we now know scientifically only deepens that ancient intuition. Plants sense. They remember. They communicate. They decide. They may not think as we do, but they live in constant conversation with their world. And when we stand among them, we are not in silence at all. We are surrounded by a chorus too slow, too subtle, too patient for us to easily hear. If intelligence is not confined to brains, then perhaps the green world is filled with minds, each leaf and root and stem a node in a great network of awareness. And if that is true, then the earth is more alive, more awake, more thoughtful than we have ever imagined. The hidden life of plants is not just about survival, but about a way of being, rooted, patient, connected, and enduring. Beneath our feet lies another world. We walk over it daily, hardly noticing. We build roads across it, plant gardens in it, dig foundations into it. And yet, we rarely stop to imagine what it contains. To us, soil is simply dirt, a substance to be managed, shoveled, brushed away from shoes. But to plants, and to countless other beings, the soil is not just background. It is alive. It is a realm of constant activity, a world that rivals the sky in complexity, hidden only because it is out of sight. If you could somehow peel back the layers of earth beneath a forest, what you would see might astonish you. Roots branching and dividing in all directions, as fine as threads of hair. Insects tunneling, beetles carving chambers, ants constructing cities. Worms twisting through corridors, digesting and enriching the soil. Bacteria swarming in invisible millions, breaking down fragments of matter too small for us to see. And running through all of this an even more delicate web, the filaments of fungi, stretching outward in endless networks. These filaments, called hyphae, are thinner than a strand of hair, and yet they form vast underground systems that can span whole forests. Together, they are known as mycelium. It is through these fungal threads that plants find their hidden connections. From one root to another, the filaments extend like bridges, fusing the lives of separate trees into a shared network. This is what some have called the wood wide web. To think of a forest as a collection of isolated trees is to miss the truth. The forest is a community linked below the surface, stitched together by mycelial lace. The partnership is ancient. Long before the first forests rose, even before plants had leaves or roots as we know them, they joined hands with fungi. The earliest land plants were fragile, tiny, moss-like forms without deep anchors. To survive on the barren stone of early Earth, they needed help. Fungi provided it. Their filaments reached into cracks in the rock, extracting minerals, dissolving nutrients. In return, the plants offered sugars made from sunlight. This exchange made life on land possible. Plants and fungi have been partners ever since, entwined in a relationship so fundamental that even today, most plant species depend on fungi for survival. In modern forests, the intimacy of this connection is staggering. A single tree may be linked to dozens of fungal species, each one forming a unique partnership. Through these connections, the tree can extend its reach far beyond its own roots. Nutrients drawn up by fungi miles away can be delivered back to the tree's trunk. A forest is not simply a stand of individuals. It is an interlaced network, a sharing economy operating silently beneath the ground. Scientists began to glimpse this hidden world only in recent decades. In the 1990s, experiments showed that seedlings growing in the shade could still receive carbon compounds from neighboring trees through fungal networks. Radioactive tracers revealed sugars flowing underground from one species to another. The idea that a tree could feed another was revolutionary. It challenged the long-held belief that nature was built solely on competition. Instead, it revealed cooperation, generosity, even what looked like community. Imagine a mother tree, centuries old, towering above the forest floor. Her canopy soaks in the sun. Her roots plunge deep into the ground. Through her fungal partners, she sends carbon to the young saplings around her, especially those that share her lineage. In times of stress, she provides extra sustenance, keeping them alive until they can reach the light. When she is injured or dying, she may release a final flood of resources into the network, a last act of generosity to nourish the future. What looks to us like selfless behavior may simply be the logic of the network of pattern evolved over millions of years. But it is difficult not to see the poetry in it. And it is not only nutrients that move. Information flows as well. When a tree is attacked by pests, signals can pass through the fungal web to others nearby, warning them to activate defenses. When drought dries the soil, trees linked through fungi may adjust their water use in synchrony, helping the forest endure together. In this sense, the network functions like a nervous system, a web of communication carrying messages from one part of the forest to another. The trees are not silent. They are speaking in chemistry, in sugars and signals, in exchanges too slow for our ears, but perfectly clear to their neighbors. The fungi themselves are not passive conduits. They too make decisions. They regulate the flow of resources, sometimes favoring one plant over another. They may hoard nutrients or distribute them in ways that suit their own needs. In this way, the fungal network is not merely a highway but a marketplace, with all the complexity of trade and negotiation. And yet, the outcome is balance. The forest thrives as a whole because of the invisible economy beneath it. The scale of these networks is almost beyond imagination. One single fungal organism can spread across hundreds of acres, linking thousands of trees. The largest known living organism on Earth is not a whale, not a tree, but a fungus in Oregon, stretching more than 3 miles underground. For thousands of years, it has grown quietly, unseen, connecting the forest above it in ways we are only beginning to understand. To walk in a forest, then, is to walk upon a hidden city. Every step crosses countless intersections of fungal roads, each one carrying signals and sustenance. Every tree you pass is not alone but plugged into a larger whole, a society of roots and threads. The silence of the forest is an illusion. Beneath it hums an endless conversation. This conversation shapes life above ground in profound ways. Seedlings in the understory, shaded and frail, can survive because the network feeds them. Trees of different species can share resources, balancing strengths and weaknesses. A birch, basking in the sun, may send carbon to a fir lingering in the shadows, and months later, when the birch drops its leaves and the fir continues photosynthesis in winter light, the gift may be returned. Such reciprocity blurs the boundary between competition and cooperation. In truth, the forest is both. Trees compete for light, yet share through roots. They guard their space, yet nourish their kin. It is a system full of paradox, and yet out of that paradox comes resilience. The wood wide web reminds us that intelligence need not be centralized. In animals, the brain is the seat of awareness. In forests, awareness is distributed. No single tree knows the whole, but together, through connection, the forest behaves as if it were an organism larger than any one trunk or leaf. It is a collective mind, spread thin and wide, running on the slow electricity of chemistry. And so, the next time you stand among trees, try to imagine it. Beneath your feet, threads thinner than hair stretch outward in every direction, linking roots together. Messages flow, sugars pass, warnings spread. You are not standing in silence. You are standing atop one of the oldest, most intricate networks on Earth, a network older than the internet, older than writing, older than animals themselves. Beneath the forest floor, a quiet miracle continues, a story of threads and exchanges that rarely meets the eye but endlessly shapes the lives above. Imagine the roots of a tree stretching downward, winding past stones, wrapping around the skeletons of long-dead plants. Now imagine those roots not alone, but reaching into a living web, a lattice spun of fungal threads so fine that a single gram of soil can contain kilometers of them. It is in this darkness, hidden from the sun, that one of Earth's oldest collaborations continues to weave. The fungi extend their filaments into the soil, hunting for water and minerals too elusive for roots to grasp alone. Phosphorus, nitrogen, and countless trace elements, all are drawn in, absorbed through these delicate threads, and then handed over, molecule by molecule, to the roots of plants. And in return, the plant shares the currency of its own making, the sugars born from light, a silent handshake, an agreement struck hundreds of millions of years ago, still honored today. But these connections are not only between partners, they are bridges. One tree, through its fungal allies, can be linked to another, and then another, until the forest itself becomes threaded together like beads on invisible strings. Through these bridges flow not just resources, but messages. A tree shaded too heavily may receive help from one bathing in sunlight. A seedling may sip the sugars passed down by an elder, hidden away under the canopy's darkness, yet fed by unseen generosity. This is the wood wide web, a name both poetic and precise. A network that hums with activity, though we cannot hear it. A marketplace, a whispering channel, a social fabric beneath the soil. Some trees, massive and ancient, act as hubs, their roots stretched wide and their fungal partners numerous. They become centers of gravity in this hidden world, known by some scientists as mother trees. Through them, nutrients are shared, signals are sent, and generations are quietly bound together. When a tree is attacked by insects, it may send chemical warnings through its leaves, carried on the air. But it may also send signals below, through the network, alerting its neighbors to prepare their defenses. The message is not words, not sound, but shifts in molecules, changes in flow's communication carried on currents of life. What looks still from the surface is anything but still beneath. Even death feeds this web. A fallen trunk, softened by rot, becomes a cathedral for fungi. Their filaments spread outward, digesting wood, releasing nutrients back into the soil, sending them out through the network. And nearby, seedlings rise greener, stronger, nourished by the ghost of the tree that once shaded them. The dead live on, not in memory, but in matter, passed from root to root until nothing is wasted. It is humbling to think that what we see, the canopy, the trunks, the leaves, is only half the forest. The rest lies in darkness, hidden in soil that at first glance seems inert. Yet in every handful there are billions of bacteria, thousands of fungi, countless lives intersecting. Soil is not dirt. It is the stage upon which this hidden symphony is performed. And the fungi, with their endless filaments, are its musicians, playing a song we cannot hear, but which shapes the future of every leaf above. This network is not static. It changes with the seasons, growing more dense when times are abundant, thinning when drought arrives. In times of stress, trees lean more heavily on their fungal allies, and the fungi in turn shift their patterns of sharing. Balance is always in flux. Relationships stretch, adjust, renegotiate. The forest is not a frozen agreement, but a living diplomacy, constantly evolving. And sometimes there are cheaters. Not every plant plays fairly. Some orchids, delicate and lovely above the soil, never repay their fungal partners, drawing sugar but offering nothing in return. Others parasitize the network more directly, tapping into the bridges between trees and stealing nutrients for themselves. Even here, in the quiet, there is conflict, negotiation, and the complexity of survival. Imagine standing in such a forest. The air is cool, filled with the damp smell of earth. Above, the canopy sways. But beneath you, unseen, millions of threads pulse with the flow of life. Trees are speaking, feeding, sensing. The ground you stand upon is alive with communication older than any language we know. And you, too, are part of it, breathing in oxygen released by leaves, walking on soil built by centuries of roots and fungi, working as one. Science only began uncovering these truths in the last few decades. For most of human history, we looked at trees as individuals, each trunk separate, each leaf its own. The idea that a forest could be a community bound together underground was almost unthinkable. And yet now, we are beginning to see that individuality in nature is rarely absolute. Life is layered with cooperation, as much as competition. Survival often comes not from standing alone, but from standing connected. Think of the ancient mother trees. Some are centuries old, older than the nations and stories around them. Their crowns touch the clouds, their roots stretch deeper than memory. And beneath, they are not alone. They are mothers because they give feeding seedlings, connecting the generations, making space for others to rise. Even as they weaken with age, their role only deepens. And when finally they fall, their bodies feed the network they once held together. In the forest, endings are never truly endings. And yet, this quiet system is fragile. Logging that clears a forest may sever not just trunks, but the entire underground community. Soil compacted by machines crushes the filaments, shatters the bridges. Fungicides, spread to protect crops, can silence the partners plants depend on. What we lose is not visible at first, but the effects ripple outward. Seedlings fail to thrive. Soils degrade, resilience fades. The web breaks, and with it, the harmony above. Still, where forests remain whole, the network continues, quietly shaping the balance of the planet. Without fungi, there would be no forests as we know them. Without forests, the earth would be a different world. The air thinner, the soils barren, the rivers dry. The wood wide web is not just a hidden curiosity. It is part of the machinery that allows life to flourish here at all. And as you drift deeper into this thought, consider again the silence of the forest night. The breeze carries the rustle of leaves. An owl calls in the distance. But below, under your feet, the true orchestra plays on without sound. A slow, patient exchange. A network of generosity and struggle, of giving and taking, of communication without words. It is the secret heartbeat of the forest, one that has been beating for hundreds of millions of years, and may yet beat for hundreds of millions more, if we let it. Imagine a meadow at dawn, just as the first light of the sun spills across the horizon. To us, the change from night to day is obvious. The sky glows, shadows shift, colors sharpen. But for the plants standing in that meadow, the experience is far more intricate. They are not passive shapes waiting to be warmed. They are, in their own quiet ways, watching. A seedling emerging from the soil does not know which way is up until it feels the pull of light. Its cells contain tiny pigments, molecules that act like eyes without faces. They register the presence of blue light, red light, the faint shifts between day and night. With these cues, the seedling bends, stretching toward brightness, orienting its body in space. It is as though light itself is a compass, and the plant is a needle, always aligning. Even within a single leaf, there is perception. Cells at the surface respond to light like tiny solar panels, opening and closing the pores, called stomata, that regulate breath. In sunlight, the pores open, allowing carbon dioxide to slip inside and fuel the making of sugar. In darkness, they close, protecting against unnecessary loss. Every dawn and dusk, this rhythm unfolds, a quiet inhale and exhale in sync with the turning of the earth. But plants do more than follow light. They sense its color, its direction, its rhythm. Some flowers track the sun across the sky, a slow-motion dance that takes place every day. Others only open when night falls, their pale petals glowing like lanterns in the moonlight, waiting for moths. For them, darkness is as much a signal as brightness. A single photon, the smallest unit of light, can be enough to set off a cascade of responses within a leaf. Imagine the sensitivity required for that perception, so fine it borders on the miraculous. And yet light is only one language plants understand. They are also sensitive to touch. A vine searching for support will wave gently in the air, and when it brushes against a branch or wall, special cells trigger a response. The vine curls, wrapping itself around its support, pulling itself upward. The movement may take hours, but the intention is clear. Plants feel contact, and they react with purpose. The Venus flytrap provides a dramatic example. Its leaves lie open like a mouth, each lobe lined with fine hairs. When an insect touches one hair, nothing happens. When two hairs are touched in quick succession, however, an electrical impulse fires across the leaf. The lobes snap shut, trapping the visitor inside. The plant has not only felt touch, it has measured it, remembered it, and used that memory to make a decision. Even more subtle are the plants that respond to gentle stroking or shaking. Mimosa pudica, sometimes called the sensitive plant, folds its leaves together when brushed. A hand along its stem or the weight of rain is enough to set the movement in motion. This folding may deter herbivores or simply conserve energy during disturbance. But to us, it is a reminder. The plant is not still. It is aware, and it responds. What about sound? For most of history, we thought plants were deaf to the world, untouched by vibrations. But recent experiments suggest otherwise. Roots may grow toward the sound of flowing water, even when no moisture is present in the soil. Flowers exposed to the buzz of a bee may produce sweeter nectar, preparing to reward their pollinators. A leaf, it seems, can feel the vibration of sound waves as they ripple through air or soil. If a tree falls in the forest and no one is there to hear it, the plants nearby may still sense the tremor. Vibrations travel through their tissues, triggering shifts in chemistry. It is not hearing in the human sense, but it is a kind of listening, a way of detecting motion and energy, of staying tuned to the rhythms of the world. Memory, too, belongs to plants. The Venus flytrap remembers touches for seconds, counting them before snapping shut. But other memories stretch longer. A plant exposed to drought may change its physiology, closing its pores more quickly the next time water grows scarce. Seeds can carry memories across seasons. Some will not germinate unless they have felt the cold of winter, a reminder written into their cells that it is safe to grow only when spring returns. Plants even remember wounds. When a leaf is bitten by an insect, chemical signals spread through the plant, warning distant tissues to fortify themselves. The memory of that attack lingers, and the defenses may stay heightened for days or weeks. It is a way of learning from the past, ensuring that damage suffered once is less likely to be repeated. These senses, light, touch, sound, memory, may not look like ours, but they are ways of knowing. They allow plants to navigate a world where they cannot run or hide. They provide information, and with it, choices. Do I grow this way or that? Do I open or close? Do I invest in leaf or root, in flower or seed? Every day, countless such decisions are made by beings we rarely grant the dignity of awareness. Imagine a forest again. To us, it seems calm. The leaves drift in the breeze, trunks stand straight, the ground is still. But beneath that calm, millions of perceptions are unfolding. Leaves feel the angle of the sun and adjust their tilt. Roots follow gradients of moisture, sensing where the earth is damp and where it is dry. Flowers register the faint vibration of wings and respond with sweetness. The entire forest is alive with sensing, a vast network of awareness spread across green bodies. What would it mean to see plants as perceiving beings rather than as passive matter? Our language falters because we are so used to reserving words like sense, memory, and decision for animals alone. Yet when we strip away the words, the facts remain. Plants detect, they respond, they change with experience. They live not as scenery, but as agents in the story of Earth. There is a humility in recognizing this. For so long, humans placed themselves at the center of awareness, measuring other lives by how closely they resembled our own. But the plant world offers a different perspective, that intelligence can be quiet, slow, distributed. That awareness can exist without eyes, ears, or a nervous system. That there are many ways of being alive, many forms of perception woven into the fabric of life. As you rest with these thoughts, imagine yourself as a seedling once again, emerging from soil into light. You do not see as we do, but you feel. You sense the pull of brightness above, the firmness of earth below. You stretch toward the sun, guided not by choice in the human sense, but by perception nonetheless. In every cell, pigments and proteins work together to read the world, to guide you into growth. Slowly, steadily, you unfold. The hidden life of plants is not silent after all. It is filled with senses, with awareness, with ways of knowing that we are only beginning to glimpse. And the more we glimpse, the more the familiar world of fields, forests, and gardens transforms into something stranger, richer, more alive. Think for a moment about the stillness of a houseplant on a windowsill. Day after day, it seems fixed in place, unmoving, a green ornament. Yet if you could speed up time, compress weeks into minutes, you would see it swaying and bending like a dancer following the path of the sun, adjusting its leaves, lifting and lowering, always in dialogue with the environment around it. What looks still is actually alive with motion and response, only slowed beyond our usual sense of time. This is one of the hidden truths of plants. Their senses operate in rhythms slower than ours. They live stretched across longer spans of time, and so their awareness is often invisible to us. A tree turning its leaves toward the light does not seem remarkable when the motion takes ours. But to the tree, this responsiveness is life itself. Its survival depends on detecting and adjusting, moment by moment, day by day. Consider how a forest knows the seasons. As summer wanes, days grow shorter, nights grow longer, and the balance of light shifts. Plants register these changes with astonishing accuracy. They count the hours of darkness, using pigments in their cells as clocks. When the nights pass a critical length, signals spread through the plant, telling it that autumn has arrived. Leaves begin to withdraw their pigments, revealing hidden reds and yellows. Sugars are drawn back into the trunk, stored for winter. In spring, the process reverses, triggered once again by the lengthening of days. The forest does not need a calendar. It carries the seasons within its own cells. And beyond light and dark, plants sense temperature with exquisite precision. A bud on a fruit tree will not open at the first warm day of winter because it remembers the cold. Only after enduring weeks of chill does the bud accept the signal of warmth as true spring. This requirement, known as vernalization, is a kind of safeguard. It ensures that a sudden spell of mild weather will not deceive the plant into flowering too early, when frost might still return. In this way, memory is tied to sense, a record of time written into tissues. But plants are not only readers of light and temperature, they are also chemists of the air. When a leaf is wounded, it releases volatile compounds, tiny molecules that drift outward. Nearby plants detect these chemicals and respond by fortifying their own defenses, even before they are bitten. What is remarkable is not only the response, but the specificity. Some compounds warn of caterpillars, others of beetles, each signal matched to the threat. To live in a meadow or a forest is to live within an invisible cloud of plant communication, a constant exchange of sense that we may not notice, but which shapes the behavior of countless creatures. We ourselves are drawn into this exchange without always realizing it. The fragrance of lavender, the freshness of pine, the sweetness of a rose, these scents evolved not for our delight, but as signals to pollinators, defenses against herbivores, or deterrents to competing plants. And yet we are affected nonetheless, calmed or invigorated by the invisible chemistry around us. To breathe in a forest is to participate in its language, whether or not we understand the words. Touch, too, plays a deeper role than simple movement. Roots feel their way through soil, avoiding obstacles, twisting around stones, adjusting their path as they grow. When they encounter the roots of other plants, they can distinguish friend from stranger, often avoiding their own kind while pushing past others. This ability suggests a kind of recognition, a sense of self and other embedded within the fabric of growth. Experiments have shown that roots may even prefer the soil once occupied by their relatives, as though the chemical traces left behind provide comfort or guidance. The underground world is filled with these cues, subtle imprints that steer growth. Each touch, each chemical signal, informs the root of where to go, where not to go, and how to shape its future. The story of sound is equally rich. Imagine a seedling in the dark soil. It cannot see water, but it can sense vibrations. When researchers played the sound of running water through speakers buried in earth, roots grew toward the source, as if seeking out the imagined stream. Vibrations guide growth, even in the absence of actual moisture. To a plant, sound is not music but motion, a ripple in the world that can be felt and used. Even above ground, vibrations carry meaning. The flutter of an insect's wings against a petal, the patter of raindrops on a leaf, the sway of wind in branches, all are forms of information. Plants respond with shifts in chemistry, in growth, in behavior. The world is alive with signals, and plants are tuned to hear them in their own way. Perhaps the most astonishing sense is the ability to integrate all of these cues into coherent action. Plants are not merely reacting to one thing at a time. A sunflower does not simply follow light. It balances light with temperature, with time of day, with its own reserves of energy. A tree does not simply shed its leaves at the first frost. It weighs day length, temperature, and its own readiness. This integration suggests not randomness, but decision-making choices shaped by information, processed slowly but surely. Consider the defense strategies of acacia trees in the African savanna. When grazed upon by antelope, the trees increase tannins in their leaves, making them bitter and potentially harmful. But more than this, they release ethylene gas into the air, which drifts to neighboring acacias. Those neighbors, upon detecting the signal, begin preparing their own defenses before a single bite is taken. Here we see not only sense, but foresight, a chain of anticipation rippling through the air. What does it mean to say that plants make decisions? Not decisions like ours, not choices weighed in consciousness, but still decisions nonetheless. They gather data from their environment. They compare it against their own state. They alter their behavior accordingly. It is a slower intelligence, spread across tissues, embedded in chemistry rather than neurons. But it is intelligence in its own right, shaped by the constraints of a life rooted in place. This perspective is both humbling and liberating. It reminds us that our way of knowing is not the only way. Life has explored countless strategies, and plants have refined theirs over hundreds of millions of years. They have survived ice ages, extinctions, droughts, floods, and still they endure, sensing and responding in silence. To walk through a garden with this awareness is to see it differently. The sunflowers are not merely yellow blooms, they are solar watchers, measuring the arc of the sky. The beans climbing a trellis are not merely creeping vines, they are explorers, feeling their way into the air. The trees shading your path are not passive pillars, they are timekeepers, chemists, and communicators. Every leaf is an eye of sorts, every root a hand, every flower a receiver and a sender in the great exchange of life. If you close your eyes and listen, you may even feel it yourself, the slow awareness of plants surrounding you. The rustle of leaves becomes more than sound. It is the language of air passing through sensitive tissues. The scent of blossoms becomes more than perfume. It is chemistry carrying meaning across distance. The sway of branches becomes more than movement. It is response to forces both immediate and remembered. And as you drift into rest, let yourself imagine that you, too, are part of this web of sensing. Your breath mingles with the oxygen plants provide. Your skin feels the same warmth they follow. Your life is interwoven with theirs, not only in need, but in perception. The green world is not backdrop, it is participant, perceiver, and partner. To recognize this is to step into a larger circle of awareness, one that holds us gently, reminding us that we are never alone in our sensing of the world. From the moment our ancestors first walked upright across the savannas, plants have been there, shaping our days in ways so constant we often forget to notice. Imagine those early humans moving carefully through tall grasses, pausing beneath the shade of acacia trees, plucking berries from low shrubs, or chewing on roots they had learned, through trial and error, were safe to eat. Every step of their survival was entangled with plants. Long before there were villages or tools carved from stone, there were leaves to gather, seeds to grind, fruits to share. Plants have always been the quiet companions of our story, offering sustenance, shelter, and medicine to bodies not yet armed with knowledge, but guided by instinct and necessity. Think of a firelit night in some forgotten age, when the air was heavy with the scent of wood smoke. Around the flames, people huddled, roasting tubers they had dug from the earth, chewing slowly, feeling their strength return. Overhead, the stars wheeled silently, and on the ground, bundled grasses soft the places where they would sleep. In the stillness, plants were not absent, but present everywhere in the embers of burning logs, in the baskets woven from reeds, in the mats spread out beneath weary bodies. Even without knowing words for them, humans lived in a world made almost entirely from the gifts of plants. Over time, knowledge deepened. Someone noticed that chewing the bark of a certain tree, eased the pain of a toothache. Another discovered that boiling the leaves of a shrub helped a fever pass. These lessons, carried across generations, became the first pharmacies, the earliest sciences. The forest was both a larder and a library, its pages written not in ink, but in sap, scent, and color. To walk through it was to walk through memory itself, guided by stories told at firesides. Which berries nourished, which roots poisoned, which flowers could bring visions or heal wounds. Plants were not background, but teachers silent, patient, and generous in their lessons. As centuries folded into millennia, humans began to notice something even more profound. Plants could be persuaded to grow where we wished. A scattered seed, left behind near a dwelling, sprouted into a familiar plant. The realization was slow, but world-changing. We did not always need to wander in search of food. We could stay. We could plant. We could wait. In this quiet shift began the transformation of human life. Agriculture was not invented overnight, but coaxed gently into being as humans learned to partner with plants. Wheat and barley in the Fertile Crescent, rice in the river valleys of Asia, maize in the highlands of the Americas, each became a thread binding people to place. Picture the first farmers rising with the sun, their hands moving through soil still damp with dew. They watched seedlings stretch upward, fragile at first, then sturdy. They learned the rhythm of seasons, the patience of waiting, the sorrow of drought, and the relief of rain. Their lives became synchronized with the cycles of germination, growth, and harvest. No longer just gatherers, they became cultivators, stewards of green life. In return, plants transformed human existence. Fields of grain fed more mouths than forests of wild fruit could ever sustain. Villages grew. Cities followed. Civilizations rose on the foundation of fields and orchards. But food was only one part of this partnership. Plants became medicine, woven deeply into every culture's understanding of health. Willow bark, rich with salicin, was the ancestor of aspirin. The poppy, with its milky sap, brought both pain relief and dreams. Ginger eased stomachs. Mint refreshed the breath and cleared the mind. Aloe soothed burns beneath its cool, healing gel. To walk through a garden was to walk through a pharmacy. Even today, many modern medicines can trace their lineage back to plant origins, though often distilled, refined, or synthesized. But the original knowledge came from observation, from trial, from the long companionship between humans and plants. Shelter, too, was a gift of green life. Imagine early homes lined with reeds, roofs thatched with grasses, walls woven from branches, logs stacked to form cabins. The sturdiness of oak, the pliability of bamboo, the warmth of cedar all became architecture, each culture shaping its dwellings from the trees and grasses that surrounded it. Entire cities rose from forests, each beam and plank a transformed tree. Even today, when concrete and steel dominate skylines, wood remains a silent partner. Beneath the paint, behind the plaster, trees hold us up, sheltering us as they have since the beginning. And then there is clothing. Before looms and threads, there were fibers stripped from plants' flax to weave linen, cotton soft as clouds spun into cloth, hemp sturdy and versatile, capable of binding ships and dressing bodies alike. Each thread a plant's body transformed, wrapped around us for warmth, modesty, and identity. Even in the modern age, where synthetic fabrics multiply, much of what we wear still begins in a field. When you run your hand across a cotton shirt, you are touching the sun's energy, captured in fiber and carried to your skin. Yet the gifts of plants go deeper still, into the realm of spirit and story. In nearly every culture, plants became symbols, companions in rituals, bridges between the seen and unseen. The olive branch for peace, the lotus for enlightenment, the oak for strength, the mistletoe for mystery. From the cedar groves of Lebanon to the sacred groves of India, From the yew trees guarding old European churchyards to the towering redwoods revered as ancient beings, humans have always looked to plants as more than just resources. They are emblems, guardians, and kin. It is humbling to realize how completely our lives are woven with theirs. Every breath we take is stitched with oxygen exhaled by leaves. Every calorie we eat began as sunlight captured by chlorophyll. Every home, every tool, every garment, every page of a book carries within it the quiet labor of plants. And yet, in the rush of daily life, how rarely we stop to thank them. They stand outside our windows, lining our streets, filling our markets, waiting patiently in fields and forests, offering everything, asking nothing. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine your own day stripped of plants. Breakfast vanishes first the bread, the fruit, the coffee, or tea. The chair you sit in collapses, the table disappears, the walls fall away. Even the very air begins to thin, until breathing itself becomes impossible. Without plants, not only human civilization, but all animal life falters. We are threads in their tapestry, not the other way around. And so, when we think of plants, we must think not only of their beauty, but of their generosity. They have been with us since the beginning, companions in every age of our story, shaping our bodies, our homes, our medicines, our myths. They are not background. They are the stage, the actors, and the breath of the play itself. To walk among them is to walk among old friends, quiet, steadfast, and endlessly giving. When we trace the story of humanity, we see that plants were not just companions in survival, but also companions in imagination. Wherever people gathered, they carried with them not only seeds in small pouches or tucked away in clay pots, but also the stories of those seeds. A plant was never only a plant, it was a symbol, a lesson, a thread in the tapestry of meaning. When rice was planted in the low fields of Asia, it was not only food, but also a cycle of renewal, the rhythm of seasons that shaped entire cultures. In the Nile Valley, the stalks of papyrus were not only reeds, but also the foundation for writing, for the very possibility of carrying words across time. In the Americas, maize was not merely grain, but a being revered in myth, a figure seen as a parent, nourishing the people as a mother or father would. Plants nourished the body, but also the spirit, weaving themselves into prayer, ritual, and the languages of myth. Imagine a quiet morning thousands of years ago, when a farmer kneels to sow seeds into soft earth. The gesture is simple, almost ordinary, but in it is a profound trust. To place a seed into soil is to believe in tomorrow. It is to surrender control to forces unseen, the moisture that may or may not arrive, the warmth of the sun, the patience of time. From this act grew the rituals of offering and prayer, songs sung to the fields, dances meant to call down rain. Across continents, people looked at the green world with reverence, knowing that their own survival was bound to the mystery of germination. It is not surprising, then, that many of the world's oldest stories are stories of plants. In Mesopotamia, the cedar was sacred, its forests guarded as the realm of the gods. In India, the fig tree, the peepal, or Bodhi, became a symbol of enlightenment, for it was beneath its canopy that the Buddha was said to have awakened. In Greece, the olive tree was a divine gift, offered by Athena herself, its oil burning in lamps and healing wounds. In the Americas, the Maya told of maize people, born of ground corn, their flesh made of the staple that sustained them. Plants were not just food, they were ancestors, deities, and teachers. And even as civilizations grew more complex, that reverence did not fade. Gardens became sanctuaries, places where the human urge for order and beauty met the patient vitality of plants. In Persia, enclosed gardens symbolized paradise itself, watered by channels that reflected the rivers of heaven. In Japan, moss and pine became elements of contemplative design, guiding thought towards stillness and impermanence. In medieval Europe, cloister gardens grew herbs for healing, but also served as spaces of reflection where monks walked slowly, attuned to the quiet companionship of flowers and vines. To shape a garden was to shape not only the land, but the mind, a space where humans and plants met in shared peace. Think of paper, the thin sheets upon which knowledge flows. For much of human history, paper was not abstract, but profoundly botanical. Papyrus reeds pressed flat, mulberry bark softened and layered, hemp fibers beaten into pulp, linen rags transformed into pages, all of these carried ink across centuries. Without plants, there would be no books, no letters, no poems passed hand to hand. The words you hear now, in this very moment, ride on a tradition made possible only because plants gave their bodies to record our thoughts. Every library is a forest in another form. And yet, while plants provided stability, they also carried within them the power of transformation. Consider sugarcane, that tall grass whose juice could be boiled into crystals. Sweetness, once rare and treasured in fruits and honey, became abundant, reshaping economies, diets, even histories of colonization and trade. Or think of coffee, its roasted seeds brewed into dark, fragrant drink, quickening the mind, fueling conversations, revolutions, and daily rituals across continents. Tea leaves steeped in hot water spread from Chinese mountainsides to the corners of the world, shaping commerce and ceremony alike. Tobacco, cotton, rubber plants, whose properties and fibers entangled entire empires. In their stillness, plants quietly directed the course of human history, influencing choices, migrations, and conflicts far beyond the fields where they grew. Plants also taught us patience. A fruit tree does not give in the first year it is planted. A grapevine may take seasons before it yields its clusters. Bamboo waits underground for years before suddenly rising skyward in a rush of green. To live with plants is to live with time measured differently, in seasons and cycles rather than hours and days. Farmers learn to look at the sky, to read the soil, to listen to the quiet language of growth. In their rhythms, people found metaphors for endurance, resilience, and renewal. The sayings of countless cultures reflect this. Patience is a seed. Character grows like a tree. Wisdom takes root. But alongside reverence and utility came danger and caution. Not every plant was generous. Some leaves carried poison subtle enough to kill unnoticed. Some flowers lured with beauty, but harbored toxins. The same green world that fed and healed could also harm. And so knowledge of plants was always edged with respect, carried carefully in oral traditions, guarded by healers, shamans, herbalists. The ability to distinguish between the edible and the deadly, the healing and the harmful, was not just skill but survival. Over time, these practices grew into herbal medicine, into pharmacology, into the sciences we know today. Yet even now, deep in rainforests and mountains, local healers hold wisdom unrecorded in books, wisdom that comes from generations of listening to plants. Even as cities rose and machines reshaped landscapes, plants never withdrew. They climbed walls, rooted in cracks, spilled into abandoned lots. They lined boulevards, shaded parks, softened the edges of stone and steel. In the modern age, we still return to them for calm, surrounding ourselves with houseplants, walking in forests for solace, growing small gardens on windowsills. Something in us remembers, at the level of bone and breath, that we are not whole without the presence of green life. And beneath all of this, unseen but constant, is the exchange of breath. The carbon dioxide we release becomes their nourishment. The oxygen they exhale becomes our own lifeline. Every conversation, every laugh, every sigh in human history has been paired with the whisper of leaves, endlessly cycling, endlessly giving. To breathe is to be in communion with plants, though most of us pass our days without pausing to notice. In moments of reflection, however, that awareness returns. We realize that plants are not only resources, not only symbols, but kin. Their time is slower, their bodies rooted, their voices inaudible to our ears. Yet they share with us the same starlight captured in molecules, the same fragile thread of existence on this planet. Our stories are not separate from theirs, but interwoven. Every human life is stitched with green. So as we continue forward in this long wandering journey, let us carry this thought gently. The hidden life of plants is not hidden at all. It is written into every breath, every bite, every shelter, every word. Plants are not the background to human history. They are the stage upon which it unfolds, the silent partners without whom no story could ever have been told. If plants are the architects of the green world, then flowers are their poems. For millions of years, plants lived without blossoms, greening the earth with ferns, mosses, and towering forests of conifers. But then, something astonishing occurred. The evolution of flowers, those sudden bursts of color and form, those soft invitations extended into the air. To imagine Earth before flowers is to imagine a quieter, stranger place, filled with green, but without the vivid palette that we take for granted now. When flowers appeared, the planet changed not just in color, but in rhythm. The world became filled with fragrances drifting on breezes, with petals unfolding like whispers, with entire landscapes painted in blossoms. Why did flowers emerge? For the same reason all of life evolves: survival, continuation, the patient desire to endure. Reproduction was always the task of plants, but for eons they relied on water or wind to carry their pollen. These forces were generous, but imprecise. Pollen scattered, drifting without certainty, wasted as much as it succeeded. And so plants began to experiment with a new strategy: partnership with animals. They crafted signals in petals and nectar, invitations designed to draw creatures close. A bee brushing against a stamen, a bird sipping from a tubular bloom, a moth fluttering in the dusk hall became messengers, carrying pollen from one flower to the next. In time, this partnership blossomed into an explosion of forms, each flower shaped by the mouthparts, eyes, and habits of its pollinators. Close your eyes and picture a meadow in late spring. The air hums with bees, each one moving deliberately, yet guided by instinct and invisible cues. Flowers sway in the breeze, their colors vivid not only to our eyes, but to the ultraviolet vision of insects, patterns like hidden maps directing them toward nectar. The bees drink, gather, and in their busy wandering, they carry life from bloom to bloom. This exchange is older than any civilization, older than language, older even than most mountains. Every petal you see is the result of countless seasons of quiet collaboration between plant and animal, written into the very shape of the bloom. And flowers do not stop at bees. Birds, too, have become partners. In the Americas, hummingbirds hover with wings beating so fast they blur, sipping sweetness from long tubular flowers that seem sculpted just for their slender beaks. In Africa, sunbirds dip into red blossoms. In Asia, tiny flower peckers dart among trees. Each relationship is a dialogue. The flower shapes itself to the visitor, and the visitor shapes itself to the flower. The length of a nectar spur, the curve of a petal, the timing of a bloom, all whispering to the creature that will carry its pollen. Even the wind and night have their partners. Bats, with wings stretched like shadows, seek out large pale flowers that open in darkness, offering scents strong enough to travel through the night air. Moths with delicate antennae find blossoms invisible to us, guided only by perfume released under moonlight. Some flowers bloom for a single evening, pouring all their hope into one brief invitation, trusting that somewhere in the night their partner will arrive. To witness such a bloom is to witness a miracle of timing, patience, and faith. Seeds, too, are stories in themselves. Every seed is a time capsule, a small vessel of life, carrying within it not only the genetic map of a plant, but also the nourishment needed for its beginning. To hold a seed in your palm is to hold possibility, future forests curled invisibly in its shell. And seeds, like flowers, are endlessly inventive in the ways they travel. Some wear wings, like the papery spirals of maples that spin through the air, twirling down like helicopters in miniature. Some cling to fur, with hooks and barbs that hitch rides on animals passing by. Some are swallowed in bright fruits, carried in the bellies of birds, and return to the earth far from where they began. Think of a dandelion puff, lifted by a child's breath, its seeds drifting like tiny parachutes across a field. Each one lands softly, ready to root in soil, a new life beginning from a speck so small it seems weightless. Or consider the coconut, a seed so large and buoyant it can travel across oceans, carried by waves until it reaches a distant shore. There, it cracks open, roots into sand, and begins a poem that will sway above new waters. Seeds are not merely beginnings. They are travelers, voyagers, explorers on behalf of their parent plants, seeking new places where green life may take hold. The beauty of flowers and seeds is not only in their form, but in their patience. A flower opens not in haste, but in its own time, waiting for the right light, the right warmth. A seed may wait years, even centuries, before it awakens. Beneath the sands of deserts, seeds lie sleeping, holding their breath for the rare gift of rain. In ancient tombs, archaeologists have found seeds still viable, sprouting when returned to soil after thousands of years. They are reminders that time moves differently for plants, that life can be stretched and stored, waiting quietly for the right moment to emerge. Humans, too, have been caught by the spell of flowers. We grow them not for food or shelter, but for beauty, for joy, for love. We cut them, gather them, paint them, give them as offerings. A rose in a hand, a garland around the neck, a bouquet on a table, each one a silent gesture of connection, carrying meanings too complex for words alone. Flowers have become the language of affection, of grief, of celebration. In gardens and homes, they remind us of fragility, of the fleeting nature of beauty, of the cycles of bloom and wither. Perhaps this is why we are drawn to them, because in their brief, vibrant lives we see reflections of our own. And yet, beyond beauty, their work never ceases. A field of sunflowers is not only a spectacle, but an engine of pollination, each golden face turning toward the sun in unison, each seed head forming spirals of astonishing mathematical precision. Orchids, delicate and elaborate, play tricks on their pollinators, mimicking the appearance of female insects to lure males closer. Passion flowers unfurl with complex, almost otherworldly designs, each thread of petal and stamen placed with purpose. The variety of flowers is staggering, yet each one is a solution to the same riddle: how to continue life, how to ensure the next generation. When you next see a flower, pause for a moment. Look closely at its veins, at the way light gathers in its petals, at the silent invitation it extends to the world around it. Inside that bloom lies not only beauty, but strategy, history, and hope. And when you see a seed, small and unassuming, remember that it contains not just one life, but the possibility of many groves, meadows, forests waiting silently in its shell. The hidden life of plants is written most delicately in flowers and seeds, where survival meets artistry and necessity becomes poetry. The story of flowers is also the story of attraction, of signals sent and received in a language we can barely perceive. To us, a meadow may appear as a scatter of colors, but to a bee, it is a glowing map of ultraviolet patterns, each bloom radiating pathways invisible to our eyes. To a butterfly, scent is as important as hue, guiding it to the nectar that waits deep inside a blossom. To a bat, the echo of its own calls leads it to wide, pale flowers that open at night. Each pollinator experiences the world differently, and plants have adapted accordingly, tailoring their invitations to the senses of those who come to visit. Some flowers are extravagant, flaunting themselves with brilliant colors and large petals, shouting their presence to the world. Others are subtle, modest in appearance, but potent in fragrance, releasing perfumes that linger in the air, drifting far beyond the reach of sight. Vanilla orchids open with sweet scent, their invitation irresistible to certain bees. Night-blooming jasmine fills the darkness with fragrance, so strong it seems to hang in the air like music. Lavender fields roll with purple blooms, but it is their aroma that travels, weaving itself into memory, calming minds, soothing hearts. These scents are not mere accidents, they are strategies, carefully shaped over millennia, designed to guide, to beckon, to entice. And then there are the strange and wondrous flowers, whose methods border on trickery. A corpse flower, blooming rarely but magnificently, produces an odor like rotting flesh, attracting flies and carrion beetles that come seeking decay, only to leave dusted with pollen. The bee orchid mimics the appearance and even the pheromones of a female bee, luring males who, in their attempts to mate, carry pollen away to another bloom. Such dissections remind us that beauty in the plant world is not for us alone. It is functional, adaptive, and at times mischievous. Flowers are works of art, but they are also tools of survival. Seeds, too, have strategies that read like stories of cunning and endurance. Some wait for fire, their shells so tough they can only crack open when flames pass over the land, ensuring that they sprout in soil cleared of competition. Others need to pass through the stomach of an animal, their coats softened by digestive acids, their release timed with the dropping of fertile waste. Some rely on water, with husks that can float for weeks or months before finding land. Some, like the tiny seeds of orchids, are so small they contain almost no food reserve, depending instead on fungi in the soil to nurture them until they can grow. Each seed is a problem solved, a puzzle of continuation, answered in ways endlessly inventive. There is poetry in the way seeds scatter themselves. Think of milkweed, its silky threads catching the wind, gliding like drifting stars across the summer air. Or acorns, heavy and humble, dropping with a soft thud to the forest floor, awaiting the hidden work of squirrels who bury and forget, leaving behind caches that will someday become oaks. Imagine a pine cone, its scales releasing seeds one by one, each with a fragile wing to carry it outward, further and further from its parent. In these small movements lies the persistence of forests, the renewal of landscapes. The quiet rain of seeds is a rain of futures, falling every season, every year. The intimacy between flowers, seeds, and the animals that serve them cannot be overstated. Without pollinators, most flowering plants would fail to reproduce. Without flowering plants, countless pollinators would starve. It is a dance of interdependence, a choreography perfected over millions of years. Bees shaped flowers, and flowers shaped bees. Birds lengthened their beaks, and blossoms stretched their spurs. Moths and bats adjusted their senses, and blooms responded with scent and timing. The green world is not static, but relational. Every curve of a petal, every droplet of nectar, every spiral of a seed, designed in dialogue with life around it. Humans, too, have entered this dance, though often without noticing. We cultivate fields of wheat, rice, and maize, their flowers less showy, but no less essential, relying largely on wind for pollination. We tend orchards of apples, cherries, and almonds, their blossoms opening like small constellations each spring, each one awaiting the visit of a bee. In tending these plants, we have become caretakers not only of them, but also of their pollinators. The hum of bees in a field is as crucial as the rain and sun. In recent years, as pollinators face decline, we are reminded just how fragile this relationship is, how easily the threads of this ancient dance can unravel. Without pollinators, much of what we eat, much of what sustains us, would vanish. Flowers and seeds remind us that survival is not solitary, but shared. And yet, for all their practicality, flowers still strike us with wonder. A child bends to pick a daisy, marveling at its white rays around a golden center. Lovers exchange roses, their petals unfolding like secrets. A mourner places lily upon a grave, each bloom a symbol of transience and remembrance. A gardener kneels to tend tulips or peonies, their shapes repeating patterns perfected by evolution, but experienced by us as beauty. Why should survival take such graceful forms? Why should necessity appear so lovely? Perhaps it is because beauty itself is a form of communication, not only to pollinators, but to all who witness. Perhaps, too, our sense of beauty evolved in tandem with flowers, shaped by their presence as much as their presence shaped us. Even when cut and placed in a vase, flowers continue their silent work, holding form and fragrance for days, offering us small windows into cycles much larger than our own. We measure time in blossoms, cherry blossoms in spring, sunflowers in summer, chrysanthemums in autumn. Festivals bloom around them. Songs are written of them. Entire aesthetics are built upon their brief, radiant lives. In every corner of the world, flowers remind us that life is fleeting, but also endlessly renewing. Seeds, on the other hand, remind us of endurance. To plant a seed is to plant hope, to trust in a tomorrow we may never see. Farmers who plant olive trees may never taste their fruit, for the tree will take years to mature, yet they plant them nonetheless, offering abundance to the next generation. A seed is both fragile and indestructible, a speck of dust that can survive fire, drought, even centuries buried beneath earth. If flowers are poems, seeds are promises small, patient, and unyielding. Together, flowers and seeds are the heartbeats of plant life, pulses of renewal, repeating again and again through time. They are the reason the planet is covered in green, the reason we are surrounded by orchards, gardens, forests, meadows. They are the reason birds fill the air, bees hum in fields, butterflies dance on summer afternoons. Without them, the world would be quiet, barren, still. With them, it is alive, ceaselessly renewing itself in color, fragrance, and form. And so, when you see a field of wildflowers, or a single bloom on your table, or a seed resting in your hand, pause. Remember that you are looking at more than beauty. You are looking at survival shaped into artistry, at necessity dressed in fragrance and form. You are looking at a story older than mountains, one that continues to unfold every day around you. You are looking at the hidden life of plants, revealed in petals and shells, in pollen grains and drifting seeds. You are looking at the poetry of survival, written softly across the earth. The unfolding of a flower and the journey of a seed are at their core acts of generosity. Plants create abundance not only for themselves, but for countless others. Nectar feeds pollinators. Fruits nourish birds, mammals, and insects alike. Seeds travel in fur, feathers, and stomachs, carried far from their source, sown into the world through the movements of others. In this way, flowering plants built ecosystems, weaving connections that turned isolated landscapes into networks of life. Every blossom is an offering, and every seed is a gift passed forward. Consider the apple, a fruit that has traveled across continents and centuries. Its ancestor, wild and small, grew in the mountains of Central Asia, its seeds scattered by bears and birds. In time, humans tasted its sweetness, carried it with them, cultivated it, nurtured it into the diverse varieties we know today. Every bite of an apple is the continuation of that ancient partnership of animals and plants joining in mutual exchange. In return for nourishment, the plant's lineage spreads. In return for care, the tree bears more fruit. Such reciprocity lies at the heart of flowering plants, binding species together in shared survival. Other fruits tell similar stories. Bananas, once filled with seeds, became seedless through human cultivation, relying entirely on our hands to carry them forward. Wheat, rice, and corn were once wild grasses, their grains small and fragile. Through patient tending, generation after generation, we coaxed them into abundance, reshaping their seeds until they became the staples of civilization. Coffee, cacao, tea, began as flowers on plants that adapted their chemistry to attract, to defend, to endure. We, in turn, became addicted to those compounds, weaving them into rituals of waking and comfort. In the simple act of flowering, of fruiting, of seeding, plants reshaped human history. But not all stories are sweet. Some flowers and seeds defend themselves with equal cunning, producing toxins that warn or punish those who consume them. Foxglove blooms with purple spires, yet within its leaves lies a compound that can still the heart. Castor beans produce seeds that gleam like polished gems, yet inside hides one of the deadliest substances known. Even almonds, when wild, contained bitter toxins, only some later domesticated into sweetness. Such defenses remind us that flowers are not created for us. They are strategies of life, and life is both generous and guarded. To survive, plants must sometimes repel as well as attract. Pollination itself is not always gentle. Some flowers close tightly around their visitors, ensuring pollen sticks firmly before releasing them. Others demand specific actions. Bees must buzz at just the right frequency to loosen pollen from tomato flowers, shaking it loose like dust from a hidden chamber. Certain orchids trap insects inside their blooms, releasing them only after the flower's design ensures they will depart carrying pollen. What seems to us like beauty and grace is, in truth, precise mechanics, an engineering of life that makes every petal, every scent, every color purposeful. Yet we cannot help but be moved by their elegance. A field of sunflowers turning together to follow the sun feels like a hymn, a choir of golden faces singing silently to the sky. A lotus opening at dawn upon still water feels like a prayer, a gesture of serenity in the shifting world. A dandelion scattering in the wind feels like a wish, fragile yet certain, drifting into the future. Flowers reach us not only through our senses, but through our imaginations. They speak to something within us, something ancient, something attuned to cycles larger than ourselves. Perhaps that is why we return to flowers again and again, in art, in story, in ritual. We paint them on cave walls, weave them into crowns, carve them into stone. We send them to celebrate birth, to honor love, to mourn loss. In every culture, flowers hold meaning, symbols of transience, of renewal, of purity, of passion. In Japan, cherry blossoms fall in a brief snow of petals, reminding all who watch of the fleeting beauty of life. In Mexico, marigolds blaze on altars during Dia de los Muertos, guiding spirits with their vibrant color and scent. In ancient Egypt, lotus blooms symbolized rebirth, rising from the waters of the Nile each morning. Across time and place, flowers have been our metaphors, our messengers, our mirrors. Seeds, too, have entered our imaginations. We tell stories of magic beans that climb to the sky, of grains of wheat that sustain nations, of seeds hidden in vaults beneath the Arctic to safeguard the future. We keep packets of them in our drawers, plant them in gardens, scatter them on graves. We speak of sowing and reaping, of harvest and hunger, of the seed as both beginning and end. In their silence, seeds carry more than plants. They carry our hopes, our fears, our sense of continuity in a world that is always changing. There is a profound humility in seeds. They do not demand attention. They rest quietly, waiting. They endure drought, fire, frost, centuries buried in forgotten soil. Some have sprouted after lying dormant for thousands of years, their patience unmatched, their resilience astonishing. To hold a seed is to hold time itself, compressed into something smaller than a fingernail, yet larger than history. A seed contains the memory of the earth, the record of survival written in its code, and the promise of futures we cannot yet imagine. In the grand story of life, flowers and seeds are chapters that repeat endlessly, cycles spiraling through deep time. Long before humans walked the earth, ancient plants produced spores, cones, and eventually blossoms. Dinosaurs waded through fern forests, as magnolias first opened their blooms. Primitive mammals carried seeds in their fur, dispersing them unknowingly. Over millions of years, flowers spread across the continents, transforming landscapes, reshaping climates, making possible the diversity of life that followed. Without them, the world as we know it would not exist. Every breath we take, every meal we eat, every landscape we inhabit is built upon their quiet work. And still, the story continues. Flowers open each spring, as though for the first time, even though they have done so for millions of years. Seeds fall each autumn, as though uncertain of their fate, even though the cycle is as old as forests. We may see them as fleeting, fragile, delicate, but in truth, they are among the most enduring forms of life on Earth, carrying the planet forward with relentless grace. So when you next pass a wildflower by the side of a road, or peel a fruit in your hand, or plant a seed in soil, pause for a moment. You are touching the living memory of the Earth. You are participating in a story older than language, older than mountains, older than oceans in their present form. You are holding beauty and survival intertwined, art and necessity woven together. You are, in that small act of noticing, aligning yourself with the vastness of time, with the patience of seeds, with the generosity of flowers. And perhaps that is their greatest gift, not only the fruit, the food, the color, the fragrance, but the reminder that life is both fragile and enduring, fleeting and eternal. That what blooms will wither, but what seeds will rise again. That in every ending lies a beginning, and in every petal, in every shell, the earth whispers its promise of renewal. Since the beginning of story, since the first fireside gatherings where language became more than survival, humans have looked to plants for meaning. We have always known, even if only in whispers, that they hold something beyond their quiet forms. To us, they are not just food and shelter, not just shade and fuel. They are signs, companions, teachers, and symbols. We have turned their growth into metaphors, their cycles into lessons, their beauty into prayers. Wherever human imagination has flourished, plants have taken root within it, binding myth to meadow, belief to branch. Imagine a forest at night, thousands of years ago, long before cities, long before writing. The people gathered there see the silhouettes of trees against the stars. The trunks rise upward like pillars. The branches reach across the sky like arms. To those early eyes, the forest was not background. It was presence. It was alive, watching, speaking, sheltering. And so stories emerged. Stories of trees that were gods, of spirits dwelling in groves, of plants that healed, cursed, or revealed the hidden worlds. To understand nature was to understand story, and to understand story was to give reverence to the green world. Across cultures, one of the oldest and most enduring images is the world tree. It appears again and again in human myth, as if planted in the collective imagination of our species. In Norse tradition, it is Yggdrasil, a vast ash tree whose roots reach into the underworld and whose branches stretch across the heavens. All of existence hangs upon it, nourished by its strength. In ancient Mesopotamia, sacred trees were carved upon temple walls, symbols of fertility, power, and the bridge between heaven and earth. In Mesoamerican belief, the ceiba tree stood at the center of the world, its roots sinking into the underworld, its trunk rising through the human realm, its crown opening into the divine. Wherever humans settled, a great tree rose in their myths, embodying the axis of life, a reminder that the structure of the world mirrors the shape of a tree. Other plants, too, became sacred companions in our stories. In India, the banyan tree is revered, its aerial roots descending like curtains, forming endless living pillars. In its shade, people gather, pray, rest, and share wisdom. The Bodhi tree, under which Siddhartha Gautama sat and awakened as the Buddha, is still honored as a symbol of enlightenment, of stillness yielding insight. In Celtic lands, Groves of oak were seen as temples without walls, places where druids communed with nature's mysteries. The oak itself, strong and enduring, became the emblem of wisdom and protection, its acorns symbols of potential and hidden power. Even in places where writing came later, oral traditions carried these plant images forward. The cactus in desert myths, the palm in oasis dreams, the vine winding as a symbol of life's persistence. Flowers, too, became symbols of what words alone could not hold. The lotus, rising pure and bright from murky waters, became a sign of rebirth and spiritual awakening in Egypt, India, and beyond. Its petals unfold each morning like a revelation, then close again with night, mirroring the rhythms of consciousness and the cycles of existence. The rose, with its beauty and thorns, came to symbolize both love and suffering, passion and pain. The chrysanthemum in China became a symbol of longevity and the quiet dignity of autumn, while in Japan, the cherry blossom embodied the fleeting nature of life, delicate and brief, yet utterly beautiful. A single bloom could hold entire philosophies, entire outlooks on what it means to be alive. Leaves, too, carried meaning. The olive branch became a symbol of peace, carried by doves in story and ritual, extending an ancient truth, that reconciliation is as nourishing as food. In the Bible, when the flood waters receded, the dove brought back an olive leaf, signaling renewal and safety. Laurel wreaths crowned victors in Greece, a circle of evergreen leaves signifying honor, endurance, and glory. Even today, we still invoke these symbols. We say someone has rested on their laurels. We imagine the olive branch extended in friendship. Plants have lingered in our language because they have lingered in our myths. Some plants were sacred not for their form, but for their effects upon the mind. In many traditions, shamans and healers turned to psychoactive plants to open doors of perception, to communicate with spirits, to heal sickness. Ayahuasca, peyote, psilocybin mushrooms, tobacco, each of these plants reshaped not only the body but the spirit, guiding communities through visions and rituals. To many, these were not drugs or chemicals, but teachers, allies, beings with voices of their own. To consume them was to enter a dialogue, to cross into the hidden layers of reality that ordinary senses could not reach. Whether through trance, vision, or altered state, people sought plants as intermediaries between the human and the divine. Other plants held darker reputations. In European folklore, mistletoe was a plant of mystery, growing high in trees, untouched by soil, seemingly suspended between earth and sky. It was used in rituals of protection, of fertility, of warding off evil. Yet in Norse myth, it was also the instrument of tragedy, the plant that killed the god Balder, proving that even something small and seemingly harmless could bring about great change. Mandrake roots, with their human-like shape, were believed to scream when pulled from the ground, their cries deadly to those who heard them. Belladonna, the deadly nightshade, was both poison and potion, used in rituals, but feared for its lethal power. Through myth, these plants were granted character, personality, and story, as if the human imagination could not resist turning them into figures within its dramas. But perhaps the most enduring role of plants in myth and spirituality is their function as bridges between worlds, between visible and invisible, between mortality and eternity. A seed planted in the ground is also a symbol of burial and resurrection. A tree growing upward is also a ladder, a connection between earth and heaven. A flower blooming in spring is also a reminder that death gives way to renewal. These metaphors arose not because humans imposed them on plants, but because plants themselves displayed them in every cycle of growth. In their quiet patience, they lived out truths that resonated deeply with our questions and our yearnings. Even today, when science has explained so much of how plants grow, we still turn to them for meaning. We bring flowers to hospital rooms, to weddings, to funerals. We plant trees to honor loved ones who have passed. We gather beneath them to celebrate or to find shade from grief. In cities of glass and steel, we tend tiny plants in pots, finding comfort in their presence, as though they remind us of something we nearly forgot, but still deeply know. And so, throughout history and across culture, plants have been more than sustenance. They have been symbols of who we are and what we believe, guides in the unseen landscape of human thought and feeling. They are teachers, mirrors, companions in both the material and the spiritual sense. And perhaps that is why, even now, in a world of machines and speed, we still pause for a flower in bloom, still sit quietly under a tree, still carry a sprig of green into rituals and ceremonies. Plants are not only part of the physical world we inhabit, they are woven into the very stories that make us human. When we look back across the sweep of human civilization, we see that plants were always there at the center of ritual, belief, and imagination. Temples were built in their honor. Festivals were timed to their cycles. Lives and deaths were marked by their presence. They were woven into calendars and myths, carried in songs and proverbs, etched into carvings and illuminated manuscripts. Plants became the language of our relationship with time, with the cosmos, with mystery itself. In ancient Egypt, papyrus reeds lined the Nile, not only providing the material for the world's earliest paper, but also appearing in art as symbols of life and regeneration. The gods themselves were depicted holding lotus flowers, their petals offering fragrance to the air of eternity. In harvest festivals, bundles of grain were carried with reverence, for they were both sustenance and symbol, the bread of life, the annual miracle of seed and sun. Egyptian tombs were adorned with garlands of flowers, pressed into the arms of mummies, carried as offerings to the afterlife. To the Egyptians, the presence of plants was a bridge between the mortal and the divine. In ancient Greece, sacred groves were places of pilgrimage. Each grove was associated with a god or goddess, often guarded by laws that forbade their cutting. To enter one was to step into a realm outside ordinary life, where the rustle of leaves could be heard as the whispers of the divine. The olive tree was Athena's gift to the city of Athens, a symbol of wisdom and prosperity. Vineyards dedicated to Dionysus celebrated the grape as both nourishment and ecstasy, a fruit that bridged daily life with moments of transcendence. Laurel wreaths crowned poets, warriors, and athletes, a circle of evergreen, granting a touch of immortality to human achievement. In each of these rituals, plants were more than background. They were active participants in the spiritual fabric of society. In the Americas, plants carried equally deep significance. Among the Maya, maize was not merely food, it was the very essence of humanity. In the Popol Vuh, the great book of Mayan myth, the gods formed humans out of corn, mixing its dough into flesh. To this day, cornfields are not simply agriculture, but sacred ground, their growth a continuation of divine creation. Tobacco, too, was sacred, its smoke rising as an offering, a prayer carried into the sky. Cacao beans were considered gifts of the gods, used in rituals, currency, and sacred drinks that connected humans with the spiritual world. For the peoples of the Andes, coca leaves held ceremonial importance, chewed in ritual to gain strength, to commune with the divine, to offer to the mountains themselves. Plants were woven into cosmology, not as metaphors, but as living threads of existence. In Asia, the reverence for plants found expression in diverse forms. In Hindu traditions, the tulsi plant was worshipped as a goddess, a protector of homes, an embodiment of purity. The peepal tree, under which the Buddha attained enlightenment, remains a site of pilgrimage, its leaves trembling like quiet mantras in the wind. In China, pine, bamboo, and plum were celebrated as the three friends of winter, symbols of resilience, flexibility, and renewal. Poetry often turned to flowers. The plum blossom, delicate yet strong, opening in the cold, became a metaphor for perseverance in adversity. The chrysanthemum was cherished as a sign of dignity and long life. In gardens shaped with care and contemplation, plants were not simply arranged for beauty. They were composed as living philosophy, each species carrying a meaning, each placement a reflection of balance. In the deserts of the Middle East, the date palm became more than food. It was life itself in landscapes where little else endured. The Quran speaks of palm trees as blessings, and in Jewish tradition, the lulav, a palm frond, is carried during the festival of Sukkot, a symbol of strength and endurance. In Christian tradition, palms became symbols of triumph and peace, carried in processions on Palm Sunday, woven into crosses, reminders of both celebration and sacrifice. Herbs like myrrh and frankincense, resin from desert trees, became incense in rituals, their smoke rising as prayers, their fragrance sanctifying sacred spaces. Plants bridged the human with the holy, the earthly with the eternal. Even in the cold north, where winters stretched long, plants held deep meaning. The evergreen tree became a symbol of endurance, of life that persists when snow blankets the land. In Norse myths, mistletoe held the power of fate, woven into stories of love and loss. In Celtic traditions, holly and ivy were woven into winter rituals, their greenery symbols of continuity through the darkest times. Later, as Christian practices mingled with older traditions, evergreens became part of Christmas, their branches carried indoors as promises of spring's return. To this day, the smell of pine in winter carries with it not only memory, but myth, whispers of resilience that echo back centuries. Wherever humans lived, plants became part of sacred rites of passage. A newborn might be blessed with herbs or flowers. Marriages were celebrated with garlands, with rice scattered, with vines entwined. Funerals were adorned with flowers, with branches, with seeds scattered into graves. To plant something at such moments was not simply practical, it was symbolic, an act of continuity, of faith in cycles larger than ourselves. Even today, in modern times, we carry bouquets into hospitals, scatter petals on wedding aisles, lay wreaths upon graves. These acts are echoes of ancient rituals, showing how deep our instinct is to turn to plants as companions in life's thresholds. The symbolic power of plants also extends into language. We speak of putting down roots when we settle, of branching out when we explore, of bearing fruit when our efforts succeed. We speak of being uprooted when we lose home, of withering when we are neglected, of blossoming when we thrive. These metaphors are not decorative. They are essential, drawn directly from our long kinship with plants, shaped by watching their rhythms and seeing ourselves mirrored in them. To describe our lives, we borrow their language, as though our own growth makes sense only in the context of theirs. And still, beyond symbolism, there is a spiritual intimacy in the presence of plants. To sit beneath a tree is to feel sheltered, grounded, and lifted at once. To tend a garden is to take part in creation, coaxing life into form. To walk through a forest is to step into a cathedral not built by human hands, where trunks are pillars, leaves are stained glass, and silence is hymn. In such moments, the sacred is not distant. It is immediate, breathing, green, alive. Perhaps this is why even in secular times, people feel a sense of reverence in nature, a quiet that soothes, a beauty that humbles, a reminder that there is more to life than striving. Plants hold that space patiently, wordlessly. Through all this, one truth becomes clear. Plants are not only the backdrop of human life. They are part of our identity, our imagination, our sense of what is sacred. They anchor us not only in soil, but in meaning. They remind us that growth requires patience, that renewal follows loss, that beauty is fleeting, but never absent. They whisper lessons in cycles, in resilience, in generosity, if only we pause long enough to listen. The story of plants is not only one of origins and history. It is also a story of the future, unfolding moment by moment in the landscapes we inhabit and the choices we make. For as long as humans have lived, plants have been our companions, our providers, our silent partners. Yet as the world shifts under the weight of our actions, their future and ours hangs in delicate balance. To imagine what lies ahead is to step into uncertainty, but also into possibility. For the resilience of plants has always been astonishing. They have survived extinctions, ice ages, upheavals far greater than anything humanity has yet endured. Still, the speed and scale of the challenges we face together now are unlike any in their long history. Imagine walking through a forest in the early morning. The trees stand tall, mist drifting between them, roots sunk deep, leaves catching the first light. You breathe in, and the air feels alive. What you inhale is not only oxygen, but the legacy of millions of years of photosynthesis. Yet in many places, such forests are falling silent. Chainsaws and flames replace birdsong. Insects vanish. Soil is left bare. What was once a living system becomes a scar on the land. Deforestation, driven by logging, farming, and expansion, erases not only trees, but entire communities of life. Every tree lost is not just wood, it is a chapter of an ancient story, ended too soon. Yet not all is gone. Vast forests still endure, holding the atmosphere in balance. The Amazon exhales moisture into the sky, shaping weather across continents. Boreal forests store immense amounts of carbon in their soils and mosses. Mangroves cradle coastlines, protecting shores from storms, nurturing fish, and anchoring the edge between land and sea. Each of these systems is a living shield, yet each faces pressures it cannot withstand alone. Rising temperatures, shifting rains, and fires more frequent and intense. Will plants adapt as they always have, bending to the new climate? Or will the pace of change outstrip their patience? Alpine plants retreat higher up mountains, running out of room to climb. Flowers fall out of rhythm with pollinators. Crops, cultivated for centuries, falter under floods and droughts. What took generations to build may unravel in decades. And yet resilience glimmers. Weeds flourish in the cracks of cities, proving adaptability even in concrete. Fragile trees endure unexpected extremes. Arctic tundra greens as shrubs spread. Abandoned places, from battlefields to ruined towns, slowly return to life. Their persistence reminds us, life presses forward. But survival in fragments is not the same as thriving in wholeness. The challenge of our age is whether the great systems forests, grasslands, wetlands, remain intact enough to sustain the symphony of life that depends on them. Our relationship with plants is not only about survival, but about choice. For millennia, we have cultivated them for food. Wheat, rice, and maize stretch across the globe, feeding billions. But abundance comes at a cost. Monocultures weaken resilience. They depend on fertilizers, pesticides, and irrigation, altering soils and rivers. Fragility hides beneath plenty. So the question arises, can we imagine agriculture that works with diversity rather than against it? Hints already exist. Farmers practice agroforestry, weaving trees into fields to restore fertility. Scientists turn to seed banks for forgotten grains with resistance to drought and disease. Communities revive traditional knowledge, planting by the rhythms of moon and season, nurturing soil with care. These practices sketch the outline of a future where food grows alongside ecosystems rather than replacing them. Plants also stand at the heart of solutions to crises of our own making. Forests are carbon sinks, slowing climate change. Wetlands filter water and blunt floods. Cities adopt green roofs, vertical gardens, and tree-lined streets to temper heat and reconnect concrete with life. Biotechnology experiments with plants engineered to capture more carbon, tolerate harsher climates, or yield more with less. Whether through tradition or innovation, the future of plants is entwined with our attempts to heal what we have harmed. Yet we must remember, plants are not tools to wield endlessly. They are partners, and their patience has limits. Already, species vanish at alarming rates. Orchids disappear in shrinking forests. Desert shrubs vanish beneath bulldozers. Ancient trees falter under changing skies. Every extinction is not only a loss of beauty, but of possibility. Medicines not yet discovered, foods not yet cultivated, fibers not yet woven. The green world is vast, but not infinite. Still, even amid loss, plants offer hope. In seed vaults, deep underground, millions of seeds rest in silence, preserved for the future. In Svalbard, beneath Arctic ice, lies a library of life, a promise that tomorrow can be renewed. To hold a seed is to hold possibility. So what might the future look like if we choose wisely? Cities where green walls climb buildings, filtering air and cooling heat. Landscapes where farming and forest coexist. Rewilded lands where streams return and birdsong fills canopies once silent. Partnerships where indigenous wisdom and modern science guide stewardship side by side. These are not fantasies, but choices, already unfolding in small acts across the world. To imagine the future of plants is also to imagine ourselves. Are we destroyers or gardeners? The answer is not fixed. It is being written now in policies and farms, in forests and backyards. The hidden life of plants is not separate from our own. Their survival is our survival. Their flourishing is our flourishing. As we look ahead, uncertainty remains. But plants remind us of endurance. They have weathered glaciers, meteor strikes, and climates more extreme than today's. Where we see crisis, they carry memory. The question is whether we will choose to endure with them or diminish the great green story until only fragments remain. Much depends on forests, the vast green cathedrals that breathe for the planet. To let them fall is to silence the lungs of Earth. To protect them is to preserve rivers, soils, clouds, and countless beings. To walk among old trees is to feel time measured not in years, but in centuries. In their rings and roots lies a lesson. Resilience takes patience. And so, people are learning to live differently with plants. Farmers interlace wildflowers into fields. Cities soften concrete with green roofs. Communities plant mangroves to shield coasts. Scientists store seeds. Poets restore reverence. And gardeners quietly remind us that plants are not background. They are companions and teachers. To harm them is to unravel the ground beneath us. To care for them is to care for ourselves. Perhaps the greatest task ahead is not merely to preserve plants as resources, but to learn from them. Patience, cooperation, beauty, silence, and endurance. Picture a forest 100 years from now. The air is warmer. Storms are stronger. Yet trees still stand, roots pressing into soil, leaves lifting to the sky. A child walks beneath them, asking, "Will the trees still be here when I'm old?" And the answer, spoken with both hope and truth, is simple. Yes, if we care for them, they will. In that promise lies the essence of the future. Not certainty, but possibility. A possibility rooted in choice, a quiet partnership between humans and plants, carrying us both forward into centuries yet to come.